And I'm Creative Faye, and I'm with my guest, Paul Rivoche, creator of Four Stories and illustrator for Forgotten Man and Clinton Cash. And he also did Mr. X and is the background artist on a few animations such as the Batman animated series, Batman Beyond, Rock and Roll, and
Robot Dreams.
Robot Dreams. Yes, just the one you mentioned. I forgot. Sorry about that. So we'll start with some early background. So when did you start drawing, and what did you draw at that time, if you remember?
Yeah, no, I do. I've said in other streams, it's really interesting when you find yourself on a path through your life. People in different fields, whatever they end up choosing, if they have a certain passion, it's always interesting to try and actually figure that out, because sometimes the earliest roots of it are kind of lost in the mists of time, and you don't know why it all ended up that way. But I do know that as I got older and older, from being a little kid, I got kind of seized by, I guess you could call it a passion for drawing, and just got intrigued by it. And it was kind of accelerated by discovering comic books. But I was also really an avid reader. And so in the 1960s, when I was a little kid, we lived in Montreal, Canada. And that place being, I look back and I think it's fortunate, because Canada is in Montreal is in the French-speaking part of Canada, for people who wouldn't know that. So what we had is a very interesting, it's like three rivers crossed, because we had English comics, we had American comics and stories, and we had even European ones. So like Tintin or Tantan. So, at a young age, the earliest memory I have about actually drawing was, I've told the story on other streams, is I was taking YMCA swimming classes as a little kid. I was probably 6 or 7. This is my earliest memory connected to drawing. And another little guy challenged me to a contest to draw Superman. I still remember we were in a cafeteria and there's the vending machines. It was like 1965 or something. And he goes, I bet I can draw Superman better than you. And they had crayons and paper on the table. So I said, the little boy machismo, I said, okay. And then I lost, because he obviously had been practicing from comics. So somehow that experience triggered something in my little kid brain. And, from there on, as I said, discovering DC comics, going and buying them. And I got older, and that's kind of how I wove into drawing. It's at and that's the part I can't really remember. So I guess everybody has their own story. I can't remember exactly what propelled me into drawing more and more. Maybe it was that incident with the Superman contest. But at some point, the bug seized me, where I thought, I can do this. There's I'm sure you have your story. Anybody who's interested in this stuff, there's a little voice in my brain going, you could do that too. And you try it, you kind of get frustrated because it's not what you want. So you have a love-hate relationship, because you kind of you want to keep trying to scratch that itch. But then you also, sometimes you discover it's a lot harder and there's a lot more to it than you thought. Yeah, there's a whole conversation there. I don't know if I answered your question there, Faye, but.
Yeah, and then when did you decide to pursue it as a career, and were your parents supportive of your decision to go into the arts?
Yeah, those are good questions. Again, it was a spectrum or a gradation, but I think probably the time I remember maybe 14, 15, 16. It's the age where you're turning into an adult, or you see it approaching adulthood down the highway, right? And you're going, wait, I got to figure out what I'm doing. So I think from having, been an avid reader, and then I was, by that age, consuming a whole, a smorgasbord of comics, ranging from DC to things like creepy and eerie, all those kind of things, science fiction books, and other books in general. And I gathered that, hey, there's people who are actual professionals who do this full time, and it was all a bit mysterious. So following from that, I had a sort of a series of serendipitous experiences, which I could tell you about that, it would be too sort of arrogant to claim that I sort of planned it all because somehow it's a call and response thing. Like you seek and then you get some of it, maybe pieces, but you don't get, you get pushed on another course and the universe delivers something else, but you somehow go upstream and end up, like I feel very fortunate to have ended up doing this for so long because I was just groping around trying to find my way. And I can talk more about that if that's
Yeah.
interesting to you or the audience. But the other thing you asked was about my parents. And I would say they were kind of in the middle. Like they were not parents who are not. Well, my mother's still with us, and she's supportive now. And she was never really against it. She's more silent. It was more my father was. He worked for the government, and he had a coming from Europe and working for the government for his whole life. He had a very that typical mindset that you would understand or expect, which is of course, you want your children. Like I have daughters, two daughters, and I understand the mentality even better now. You want your children to do well, find their way in life. So he was thinking of a more traditional pathway, and he was always encouraging me to do that. But for my own part, I as I got older, like into the teen years, and then particularly like 17, 18, which is when I left home, I was like, the bug really got me. It's like, I got to somehow just charge into this and do this. So I was kind of bullheaded. I didn't listen. And, that comes with good and bad. But my dad wasn't completely against it. He was just very skeptical. He was like, he didn't come from that background himself. Like some artists you hear about are writers and musicians. They grew up in a musical family or whatever. Yeah. So my family was not anti-art. My parents are from Europe. Like my dad was from France, Russia, and my mother's from England. So they're very, art prone, but they weren't against it, but they didn't practice it themselves. I think they probably were kind of like, my dad in particular was like, what's he going to do? Like he had a picture of, the starving artist in Europe in a little cold flat with no running water, and like it's frozen, and he's got a little cigarette, and he's painting some paintings, and he's going down to the banks of the River Seine in Paris saying, "Will you buy my paintings, monsieur?" And he's like starving. And I remember having those conversations. I was about 17. And I said, "Dad, there's these things called commercial artists," because I had figured out that all the science fiction books, all these comics, everything design, movie design. By that time, I was reading Cinefex, I think it was, magazine. I figured out there's people who do this. They get paid money, sometimes a lot of money. But he never really kind of got that idea fully until many years later, when I had been, doing later in the 80s. And he came to visit me in Toronto in my studio, and he kind of figured it out, like, oh, okay, this is something different. So it was a whole long journey with that, but.
And so what was your first attempts to get into the business? You said that you were kind of groping around to try to figure out
how
to break in and
well, see, that's the thing is that, you see goal. And again, this is a little bit different now because these marker stones and access points to the business, like the business is more or less like you create cool stuff and hope people will like it, whether it's a comic or whatever. But the whole way it works now is obviously different. So back then it was like, I got to get published. You couldn't self-publish. Obviously, you do have to keep repeating these things because, I come from the era before all this digital and streaming, and you could self-platform yourself. And if you're willing to work hard, self-promote, and you can also connect people. So my first steps were much more problematic because not only did I not know anyone, but you don't even really know what the steps are. Yeah. So you can't Google search, like, how do I become an illustrator or a comic book artist? So that's the great benefit of nowadays. But back then, what happened, I'll tell a little mini story of what happened was, you're hoping and praying, you're working and stuff, and in my case, in my room, squirreled away after school, drawing, painting. And what happened was, now let me think when I first, it was a series of steps, and I'll try and sort of codify the chunks of it. So what it was somehow I met these older guys in high school who liked my art because I was like one of the art nerd kids in high school. And he's the artist, There's always 3 or 4 depending on the size of the school. So I guess my art had been displayed, and a couple of older students one of them worked in the print shop, and another guy who actually, a guy called Peter Jones, who just looked me up actually this year, out of the blue after like 30, 40 years. Anyway, back then he was like a year or two older. Anyway, they engaged me with an idea like, let's take your science fiction paintings and turn them into art prints and sell them. It's like a summer job. So we launched on this whole thing, and that kind of worked okay the first year, but we didn't really sell that many. And there are some analogies to what's going on today, because it was my own personal stuff mostly that we made prints of. But by the next year, we were still talking, and we got commercial, which was, they said, this was just when Star Trek, the original series, was just reviving.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, let's do an art portfolio. So I drew up this art portfolio, which you can still see sometimes on eBay. I should actually retweet some of them, but like I did all these pencil drawings. They printed them in the high school shop. And we went down the highway to the first Star Trek. I think it was the first Canadian one in 1976 or 77. It was at the hotel, the Royal York Hotel here in Toronto. Now, for me, this was a giant adventure because I was like 16 or 17. And, you know, we had this like panel van. We loaded up these portfolios. It was like an all-night trip. Like we left late, and it was just great, like just total freedom. Anyway, through that, I met a guy called Ron Van Leeuwen, who was at the Silver Snail comic shop. He used to own it, which was a famous comic store and well-known in Toronto. And he also had a distribution company. It still exists actually, but he sold it. But anyway, back then, he even started publishing comics briefly in the black and white boom at the end of the 70s. So what he did is he published a magazine called Andromeda. And because I had met him through, like I met some friends, other artists, and they in turn introduced me to Ron. And I realized as this teenage kid, there's like, hey, there's this whole scene in Toronto. You know, now it's all online, like Comicsgate and different people. But back then it was like real world.
Mm-hmm.
Meet people. So it's like, oh, Toronto, there's actually other people who are a bit older and they're in comics and they have a comic shop and they want to publish. And it was very exciting. It was just like euphoric, you know. So what happened was he commissioned me, this Ron Van Leeuwen, to draw a comic for this magazine. I eventually did a cover and different little spot illustrations and various things. And so that kind of got my feet wet. And there are a few other things, but rather than make this too long, around that time, there started to be clustering a few other little things like that. Like a game company asked me to do this little Star Trek game. So it spun off that one thing, Star Trek. A guy, yeah, it's coming back to me. He had a role-playing game called Starfleet Battle Manual, and I did the cover for it back in around 77. And there are a couple of things like that. So that really encourages you. You know, it's like, hey, I'm getting stuff published. I actually got a book cover from a real paperback house in New York City that I did a cover for when I was 17, I think. And, you know, it all encouraged me. So the next step, which again, I'll round out this answer. The next step was that just got me so fired up that by the end of high school, I decided to go to university in Toronto and did a half-hearted general Bachelor of Arts degree. But really what it was is, in my teenage brain, I wanted to just get to Toronto and live there because that's where the comic book action was. So that got me going. And then there's more. I got into this company, Nelvana. Hopefully that gives a sketch of what I was saying. That these things just kind of emerge somehow. Like,
so was the Helvana rock and roll thing? Was that before you started doing album covers, or did you do the album covers before rock and roll?
Well, that was kind of parallel. So what it was. I'm trying to think here. I'll pause to just bring my thoughts in. Well, what it was I got to Toronto, and then for about a year, I struggled to be a student. And then I just gave up because I was really always a good student in high school, you know, the monkey school, like jumping up and grabbing reciting it onto the tests or whatever. But after it was actually not even a full year, but by the Christmas of the first year, I just left school because, I mean, this is like a regular University of Toronto, and it's not a prescription for everyone. But for me, it was like, I want to be an artist. So Um, what happened was I left there and then I tried a bunch of stuff. But the real turning point came when I heard about this film that this company, Nelvana Animation, was making. And it was I guess, the first Canadian feature science fiction film. They had been doing TV specials. They did one that was well known called A Cosmic Christmas, and other ones like that in Nelvana in the early days. But they took a big gamble. They started this science fiction film, which has now, I understand, become a cult classic, called Rock and Rule. And I miraculously, it's again one of these things that I didn't plan this. Like, I was struggling even by this year in Toronto. I was like a step forward on the chessboard. So I was like here. I was trying to figure out, how to get work, but there wasn't really like a lot of paying work. There was a little dribs and drabs. But I was like, I'm running out of money. My dad was kind enough to actually, back then send me $50 every few months, which lasted whatever, something like that, a check in the mail. And I was like, thanks, Dad. But I was like, I got to get a job, I got to find a way to make this pay. So I was getting onto the bottom rung of the whole ladder of the industry. And as I said, it's all different now. But back then I was like, I got to, get in-house somewhere. And a guy at the comic shop said, hey, Rivo, there's this science fiction film and they need a background designer and people. They're hiring, they're staffing up. So why don't you go apply? I can't remember what I did. I must have summoned up my courage to phone them, I suppose, because there was no internet. And back then I was really a lot quieter and shyer than I would be now. I mean, it was really probably difficult. And I had no experience doing that. I was like 19 or whatever. And in this big city trying to figure it out. So but somehow I got the job. They made me audition, but there was a great day that came where they said, we'll give you the job. And I said in one of my other interviews, it was like a miracle because I kept trying and trying and trying, doing these drawings, going back. Mm-hmm. Finally, the day came, I go in and the art director said, yeah, we're going to hire you. You can be a layout artist. And I eventually turned into a background designer more than although I still did layouts. But he said, not only that, so your salary is going to start at $400 I was like, oh, what, a month? He said, no, a week. It's $400 a week. So this is like 1980. And it's like, that was like a bonanza. I mean, that was like, wahoo, I'm Donald Trump, because I was used to starving and, scraping. And it was like teleporting into a different universe because suddenly I was in the studio. There are all these other artists. They're all working. I could learn from them, meet new people socially, be exposed to all kinds of new influences. Like I saw the work of Mobius for the first time, Heavy Metal magazine. What was the French version? Metal Hurlant. And it's just a big encouragement. Like it's like running with a pack of other creatures, dogs, what have you. They're all going in that direction and you sort of get pulled along. And that was the amazing thing. And like I say, I would contrast it to now because you can find these communities online, right? Mm-hmm. But back then there was no such thing. Like you just an isolated little pod. And if you didn't know anybody, and you're in a small town or whatever, there's just no way to get that kind of comradeship, camaraderie. But what happened with this job was it did do that. Now you asked me about the album covers. What happened there is that by that time when I got this job, I was also sharing a studio that was above this comic shop, the Silver Snail. And there was a whole bunch of artists that worked there. It's Dean Motter, Ken Stacy, and other musicians and things. So I had a spot with them and I kept my spot. And I would go there at night after working on the feature film. I'd go there at night. And Dean Motter, that I ended up working on this Mr. X comic with, his day job, he was there at night too. His day job was at CBS Records, being an art director, creating album cover designs. So for a lot of the ones, he hired me to be the illustrator. And I'm not sure if he tapered over into being a freelancer and left that job eventually. I think he did. Eventually, he made his own business. So it was all very encouraging because, daytime, I'm around the animation company learning all this stuff, working really hard. Nighttime, I was at the studio. Sometimes I'd stay there super late myself, like on weekends, and just crazy young guy stuff, young person stuff. So that's how I got, those steps going. And then there were lots more adventures after that.
Yes. So I've heard from other artists that talk about working in like the studios for animation, how like sometimes when a project ends, there's like the lull before you get more work. Was there a
Yes.
long lull between that time that you worked at Havana on Rock and Roll and when you did other animation work? What was your next
Yeah,
animation
yeah.
work?
Yeah, there are always those ups and downs. So there was, in fact, like Nelvana was a really good paying job. And it was the first time in my young career that I had to face that decision, like which you sometimes do, and probably people in comics and crowdfunding would face this. Like, say you get offered a lucrative job in whatever animation or even mainstream comics, maybe there must be some people like that. And they go, well, should I take that because it's steady, but I don't really own it? But it's short-term money, but long-term, I'm not creating an intellectual property. But on the other hand, if I do, sacrifice that and work on my own stuff, I'm in a different position. So that kind of happened to me, although I was much younger and more naive about it, because this Dean Motter had this idea for this comic, Mr. X, and I had just left Nelvana, which was, as I said, that was the first time I made this hard decision because I'd been there for about a year and a half, 2 years. It was going okay, but it became clear to me, and this intuition proved to be true, it became clear to me that the film was not going to do well. I can't say how I knew. And it didn't really, because it kind of didn't have a market for what they were doing back then. A film like that would do probably much better now. Certainly the whole genre has developed much more. But back then it was like a wild card, especially in Canada. And there's lots of aspects to that whole story. But what I did, though, is I made the tough decision to forego that nice salary. And I went back off on my own, which maybe in a way was a bit foolish, but it was also kind of like, you just got to do it because you'll be there forever. And I was like, in my early 20s, I was like, I don't want to be stuck in this one company forever, just being like everybody has to make their own choice. But for me, it was like, I want to create my own work. I want to develop my art as much as I can. And to do that, I need freedom and I need to go out and just figure something else out. So it was a bit more of a leap through another doorway into the unknown. And I call those kind of doorways, they're like an auditorium, where there's a crash bar behind you, like you go out, but when you turn around, you can't get back in. So it was like I'm out. And then it was like, oh, I don't have money because the savings ran out after a while. And then, as I said, this Dean Motter, and there's a young guy, Bill Marks, who had his beginnings of a comic book company, Vortex Comics. And they were like, let's do this comic, Mr. X, which became a whole saga and another whole experience, and not necessarily lucrative, but it was a learning, another on the graph of the learning journey. It was another kind of chunk of it for a couple of years.
And were you just an illustrator on that one, or did you write some of it, or all of it?
I've been saying now the truth, which is that I co-created the basic world of it. This Dean Motter had the original. He had done a painting for an album cover because he was an art director. He also did some work. He is also an illustrator and does some images for covers. And he is a really great designer. Anyway, so he had done this painting of an intriguing character with these dark sunglasses and a trench coat, standing in front of kind of an Art Deco building with these searchlights. And he was like, oh, this is Mr. X. And I forget if that was a placeholder name. I think it was. It's like, well, I don't know who he is. He's Mr. X. He eventually stayed being Mr. X. But the thing for me was I had just come off designing, being a world builder and working in terms of like working for this film, Rock and Roll, for Nelvana. I'd been tasked with working out all kinds of environments, and I was really up in that. And I was also secondarily really up on drawing comics. I wanted to go, it had always been my primary thing. But then you triangulate because you realize, well, I want to do that, but can I get money doing that? So then you sidestep and improvise. And that's how I ended up in animation, although I loved animation and still do. So anyway, it was like, oh, you're the guy, you've got world building and you've got comics interest, and I had done some comics. So I spent about a year working on the design of it and fleshing out like what is this thing. So yeah, that's how I got into working on that project. And I'm not sure what your question was. I think I forgot.
Oh, I had just asked what your role was in that.
Yeah. So yeah, I worked on the early design. So in that sense, co-created the world of it and the settings, the look of the art. I did a series of pre-release posters. So nowadays on crowdfunding, you do the pre-launch page, or whatever.
Yeah.
I do some teasers or whatever. So back then there was no pre-launch pages. There was just things like what we did was, I think, a little innovative, although others may have done it. But certainly we were some of the earlier people. We did a series of posters to be sent to comic book shops in the direct market. And as we're getting the comic ready now, and so that was very popular, and it drummed up a lot of interest. Like people were like, "What's this mysterious Mr. X?" These posters I had done, and anyway, so that got released. It ended up not working out that well in terms of me having. That's almost like another whole stream, but me having some issues with the whole thing, and eventually I left the project. Although I still cooperated somewhat with it, I did some covers for it. And on the very first issue, which was drawn by Jaime Hernandez, who later did, well, actually at the same time they were doing Love and Rockets. I did the lettering and the coloring on the first issue, and I continued doing some covers and things. But really from there, I branched out into being an illustrator. And is again a case of improvising and sort of sidestepping, like, what am I going to do? And then it kind of was dawning on me more, oh, there's illustrators. So maybe I can use my art and drawing, ability to be an actual illustrator, which is what happened. So I veered off into doing illustration for quite a few years in the 80s. Eventually had an agent and did a lot of different kinds of work, magazines, illustration, even stuff for newspapers, book covers, paperback covers, and things like that. What else? Educational publishing, like images for textbooks. And eventually I veered back kind of into comics and started doing stuff in comics in the 80s. And, I guess this is my whole life story, but by the 90s, early 90s, well, then I got into the age where you get married and have children and houses and mortgages. Well, I had one house. And so then I veered back into animation again because I needed steady work. It was like, got to pay for all this. So yeah, go ahead.
The comics you did in the 80s, was that when you did the Sandman and some of the cover work for Marvel? Or was that when you did The Forgotten Man and Clinton Cash?
Yeah, that was all much later. The Clinton Cash was, I think, 2008 around there. And I don't blame you. It's there's a certain order. I can't even remember it always. But I think what happened was I worked on Alien Worlds, one of the issues that Bruce Jones did. And I did a story called Soft Boil, just one story. I'm trying to remember the sequencing of it. I got some covers from DC. I think it was later after doing the animation work. I don't know how much work I did for comics in the 80s. There were maybe sporadic things. I'll probably remember afterwards. But Sandman thing, yeah, it's always what happens. You go, I wish I had said that.
Mm-hmm.
The Sandman thing was, and the DC work, mostly it came about because, in fact, I got the work working for Warner's doing animation backgrounds, Batman Beyond and Batman Animated. And that came about because I was connected to them by this my art hero and kind of mentor, Alex Toth, who is a genius artist. And I was corresponding with him by postcard. And, you might have seen on my channel, I've been doing readings of his postcards to me, which I've got to get back to. But anyway, he was kind enough in this period when I was newly married, actually, and income desperate. And I must have on the phone or on a postcard just been moaning about it. He said, "Oh, well, Warner Brothers in Hollywood here, they're staffing up for doing more series. I'll put you in touch with Bruce Timm," which is what happened. So I'm eternally grateful to him because that kind of just connected me right over. And I got right into being a freelancer working from Toronto, and being paid on as if I was a staff member, which was great. And through that, I think through that exposure, I ended up somehow, and I don't remember how exactly, connecting to DC Comics and got work like the Sandman Mystery Theater story I did. And later, I did some bunches of Superman covers. And then later from that, in around 2008, I did the Forgotten Man graphic novel. But that's kind of a parallel thing because that was more in book publishing and completely ignored by the comics world, particularly because they probably thought it was like right-wing weirdo stuff, which it's not really. It's more like a historical thing, but you get labeled.
Yeah.
But miraculously, in 2014, I popped up back onto the scene because Marvel, out of the blue, contacted me and said, I did a run of Iron Man covers for different projects because I don't know exactly what to attribute that to, but I was happy to do it and had fun. And yeah, I think I did probably 8, 10, I can't remember, a bunch of Iron Man covers. So
then 4 Stories, was that your first solo exercise into comics and storytelling?
Yeah. So I self-published that, and that was around 2010. And what that was, like, it was an early attempt. It's interesting because lots of people have been doing these things, but the whole scene like it is now with self-publishing really wasn't fleshed out, as I'm sure you would know.
Mm-hmm.
So back then, what had happened was, in the years from around maybe 2000 to around then when I did that book, I had been asked by a guy called Chris Pitzer to do short stories. Chris Pitzer. He did 4 different anthologies, 3 or 4, I forget. And they're all had the first name Project. Like, he did one called Project Telstar, Project Superior, Project Romantic. And he got a lot of different artists for each one, and they clustered around the theme. So, like, for example, Project Superior, he just had a very simple commission. It was very low paying. I forget what it was. It might have even been like $50, but I didn't care because it was like, do me a story. And it was beautifully produced and printed, but I probably didn't ever make a lot of money. But for me, it was like the appeal was that it was his selling thing, which was like Project Superior. So do your take on a superhero, preferably alternative, like do some kind of wrinkle or twist on it. But do your own thing. You own the thing, the property, but I'll publish it. And sure enough, he did. And he's a designer, maybe an ad guy designer. I'm not sure, but really good packaging if you look them up. And as I said, he did 3 or 4 of these. So he was kind enough to ask me to do stories. And so I did one for each of these anthologies. And I managed to kind of use it to springboard my own ideas that, like, it was like self-judo, because here I was working like cranking out all this commercial work, which I liked doing and was glad to do, but the pressure is pretty intense, like every week. I had a young family, and anyone in that position, when your kids are little, you've got all this bills and crazy stuff. So I was like cranking it out. But this offer was too good to refuse, because when Chris said, like, I'll publish it, it'll be a really nice platform. I thought, okay, I've got to just force myself to do it, because even though I'm busy, because if I don't, like, the years go by, you just don't do anything. So I managed to get, some of them were shorter than others, but I took some of those stories eventually, and I had done one other one, a story called Robot in the Rain that was done it's in that 4-story book. I would have held up a copy if I didn't think of.
If you want to go grab it, you can.
Yeah, let me just think. One sec. You know what? I'll just stop my camera for 1 sec. And you can probably still hear me rustling around. Yeah, here it is. There we go. All right. So I managed through this website called Blurb, and they later interviewed me, which is where, if you watch EVS's streams, that silly intro, whoever made it, they took Blurb, which is a self-printing website that still exists.
Mm-hmm.
They came and interviewed me in 2014. So they did a little short film that's still on YouTube, like Meet Paul Rivoche. So whoever did that little intro figured that out and grabbed the footage and retasked it. But anyway, I did this book and designed it.
Oh, let me put you
full screen.
Yeah, I think. Nope. Let me. How do I do this?
Yeah, that's good. I can fit that. That's good. So yeah, so it's a really nice printed book. It's short. I took a bunch of these different stories, and I used their software back then. I want to actually re-release this and add to it, but you could. They had an early version of online software where you could design stuff and upload. Like these are files, just JPEG files that were 300 DPI of this story. This is another one I did. Oops, go this way. And it's about a kid superhero fighting this war on a dystopian Earth. And this one was from Project Romantic, and it was with these characters I do called Wind Elves. So it was much more colorful and kid-like. So what it is almost like an anthology. And I've got this up for sale, and I've got extra copies on my eBay store if anyone's interested, which you can find me easily under Rocket Fiction.
Check it out. So that was the start of like the Wind Elves. I noticed that you have like 3 Instagrams. There's the Rocket Fiction, then Wind Elves World of Wind. Yeah, Wind Elf World. And then Art Principles, where you put up different principles of art and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Form. And from, I think, the Instagram with the Wind Elf World, I saw that there's a website coming. So are you planning on launching a new project with that?
Yeah, I've got this disease called overambitionitis. Probably most people do. Yeah, got too many ideas. So it's always a triangulation between pragmatism, being pragmatic, and surviving. Versus like if you were a millionaire, you just said, "I'm going to get up and do this." So they're like the Wind Elf thing is like a pet project, and it's a completely different style and sort of like I love all those. I love children's books, the older ones. Most of the newer ones, I find it's been taken over by this one style that's just like just murders my brain. I don't want to be too mean, but I love all the old illustrated, very richly and beautifully drawn, older and more richer in concept children's stories. And that's a whole subject I could go on about. But really, when my kids were little, I started this thing, Wind Elves, and I was always drawing it. And to answer about the Instagrams, I mean, that was maybe it's also overambitious, but what I was originally doing is like everybody, I'm trying to figure out this new world of branding, streaming, social media, and how to kind of navigate through it successfully and coherently. So a while back, I realized I had to create one label, Rocket Fiction. So I did that, but then I was posting all these different pieces of my art, like different personalities, onto the one, my main one, I guess, on Instagram is Rocket Fiction. But this was like a different, if you click on the color ones, like it'll blow up so people can see a little bigger. Yeah, that's good. So this is my attempt to just split it into different personalities because I found it really incoherent. And I don't know if there's a given answer to this, but if you put really cartoony stuff, and then you're doing really dark film noir type drawings and comic book superheroes, it's like it becomes like this confusing. If someone drives by on Instagram and sees your work, they're not going to get a clear picture of who you are. So I eventually decided to split off and make these different Instagrams. So the thing, of course, is they need to be fed. So you got to feed the children. And
then you have a YouTube for this one too.
Then, you've really been researching me.
Yes, doing my due diligence, right?
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, no, it's a bit dormant, simply because this year, it just goes to show you if you embrace life, you can still change and have new things. Like in this year, there's just been so much new stuff with streaming, and I started an eBay store. I've got all this whole task list. I'm sure we all do of things to do. So yeah, what I did is I reserved the channel for Wind Elves on YouTube just because I thought, what the heck, but I haven't really added content. I think one or two tiny things, but it's just been too much. So I'll get to it though.
Yeah, you had a like a how to draw a wind elf, and then a short. And then I was also showing your art principles page where you have like different notes from.
Yes. Well, that one was, see, again, I don't know if that's over ambition. It's just diverse interests. I really have a wide range of interests. And this mentor of mine, Alex Toth, he was the one early on. He really, among other influences, like even in high school, I was reading books about art theory, all with the aim of getting better, right? And understanding the timeless craft of drawing and painting, which isn't a matter of personal opinion. It's just behind everything, and it doesn't change. You just have to find your access way into it. So in high school, I've been reading a lot of technique books in between the comics. And then I met this man, Alex Toth, who was really good at explaining what he did. So he didn't just do it intuitively. He was also a thinker. And then that sent me on a journey of always taking notes and trying to explain stuff to myself as I did it or afterwards. And eventually I've been dumping some of these. I've got bins and bins of these notes I would make to myself. I've got bins and bins of them. I started just using my phone because I saw the pathway, snap a picture, put it on Instagram. And again, I have plans for that, like in combination with back when I was doing all this work. I was friends with a guy called Mike Manley, who's a comic book artist, really great artist. And he is still operating. I think he's in Philadelphia. And anyway, he runs something called Draw Magazine, which is about craft. And so since we're in communication online, like in a group or an email list or something back then, he said, you want to do an article for this new magazine. So I did a few articles, and they were well received. And in fact, this is the ambition list. I want to, and people have asked me, is just like I did with putting my comic stories and publishing them in that 4-story book I showed you. I'd like to take those articles on drawing and some of my art principles notes and things and figure out how to make a product. But of course, that's easier said than done, like anything. It's like you have to figure out what level of thing you're doing, what finish, and make the package and publish it. So
you could
anyway,
Andy Smith did.
Right. Now, who's that one by?
Andy Smith.
Oh, it's Andy Smith. Okay. Right. Good. Yeah, there you go.
It's a little beat up. I had it since high school.
Yeah, there you go. Good one. I haven't seen that, but I mean, there's all kinds of art instruction out there. So I think it's really, really useful. And we all have our own angle on it. So I mean, early on, what I figured out, again, and it came from high school, when a teacher explained why they made us take notes. I don't know if people take notes in high school instead of having fights and putting it on TikTok. How you like anytime, what is it, World Star? Is that still a thing?
Oh, I don't know.
The fight panels, like TMZ is the you know what I mean? Like you go on TikTok or Twitter and you see all these high school fights, people pounding each other out. Like, so anyway, back then, I remember a high school teacher, he said, if you take notes and you learn to take condensed notes, you put it through your brain again and you have to explain it into the note, like to condense it down. So that made you remember it. And I noticed that in my high school studies that worked. So then I started just on my own applying it to drawing, and I made a resolution after seeing that this Alex Toth could resolution that whenever I had one of those epiphanies or breakthroughs, which hopefully we all get at times, where you have a really good day and you're like clear on how to do something, and then you make a step up and it comes out better. I thought, I've got to try and fix this, because as a commercial artist, particularly, you have to draw on demand, right? It's not a hobby. You get up, it's Monday morning and you're at the job or whatever. You realize it's a completely different thing. It's like my livelihood depends on this. And I
Mhm.
can't just go by whim or if I feel like it next week, I'll get around to it. You can't do that. So I was working in illustration and animation, and I was sometimes frustrated by the fact that, you have these amazing days and then other days where it's just like lead. It was just like
Yeah.
impossible to draw. The images weren't coming.
Mhm.
That's how I got into even more intensely studying art theory, because I thought if I make it my own and internalize it, those are things to hold on to when I have a bad day, which in fact has been proven to be true, because I liken it to if you don't go off the road as much. It's like, because sometimes when you're working on art, whether it's painting, drawing, whatever, you realize, oh, I've gone off the highway into the woods, the car crashed. It's like you wake up from a car crash, you go, that's not working. And then you go,
Yeah.
well, how did I get here? He's like, oh, it must have been back down the highway. I must have fallen asleep or steered down the wrong road and ended up in
Mhm.
the dead end. So it's kind of like that with art, that if you get more experience and you understand more technical things about what you're doing, it doesn't mean you're going to instantly every day create a masterpiece, but it does mean you have more control, I would say. And you have more like a warning bells, because there's something that goes off, goes, if you put this element there, it's the same size as the other one.
Mhm.
They're going to compete for attention. And you learned lots of times when you do that, the viewer, it's too equal, and equalism usually isn't good unless you want a static effect. It's things like that. There's endless numbers of them that experienced artists know, and that are, they form what I said earlier is this sort of, I call it, and it's an eternal body of craft knowledge that it's a well we all drink from.
I'm just writing down.
Sure. That's
And then
been doing that with things like StreamYard and
mhm.
different things, making notes about. I've got endless computer notes I've been making on files about
Yeah.
how to do stuff.
Yep. Which eventually I'll have to figure out how to blow people up on here.
You can make custom layouts, actually. It's very cool on StreamYard. You can make, there's a little plus button on the dashboard. Maybe we'll divert from
Right.
the topic of your
Oh,
stream.
there we go.
There you go. And we can even make custom arrangements with the panels, which is very cool.
So, I think it was on your Instagram you showed your workstation too. Uh, the desk that you work at.
Yeah, that's the one right over there, just over my
Yeah.
shoulder. It's the
So you
corner
don't use it.
bathroom.
You don't use a drafting table, or
I have one over there. It's pretty messy, so I won't swing around over there. But I have an old light table that I've had with me.
okay.
It's like an old friend, and it's a big old light table with the glass and the wooden surround. So I kind of use that for a drawing board when I need to draw something bigger. Sometimes I just draw over there in my little table. And
And
go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you listen to anything while you draw, or are you more a focus guy?
Uh, I alternate. I used to be really hardcore focus guy. Like don't do anything else, and sometimes I do that. But other times, I have like a TV here and on the wall there, and sometimes I put on shows or music or streaming different people, and I just let it play and I draw. Or sometimes with earbuds, I listen to music. It really varies, but often I do find it distracts me if I'm really working on something tricky, um, and trying to get those mental images clear and on the paper. So I suppose the answer is it really depends what phase uh, of the thing you're on. Like sometimes if you're filling in blacks or doing something more mechanical or routine, you can get away with it more. There's other times where I know like I'm inking something, whatever, and it's got to be just right. You really want to concentrate, especially, drawing faces and things
Yeah.
or places where people are going to notice. So stuff like that. But I do tend nowadays, being older, my eyes are much more affected by the screens. So I've been trying to migrate over to back, which is very nice, to going back to just working on paper, paint. And I may even go back and buy an airbrush again, because I stupidly got rid of it when computers came along. I had a whole compressor and airbrush,
Mhm.
very nice to use, although it kind of clogs the room up with paint.
So you need well ventilated room.
You need well ventilated, although using acrylics, it's not probably that bad for you, but for you compared to something like, I don't know if people airbrush oil paint, but that would not be healthy.
Well, acrylic paint is plastic, and that can have some detrimental.
Yeah, I spent years doing that. So I was using ink too, like silicone inks.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be like a haze in the room. So, but eventually I wore a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Long before the days of masking, I had one of those, industrial masks with the big canisters. And yeah, I spent years doing that, doing airbrush illustrations.
Very cool. And then, so you have mostly pre-recorded videos, like you did like the draw over videos too, where people send in work to have you help them out with their layouts, if it's storytelling or just portrait work.
Yeah.
And, so do you ever do you have plans for eventually like live streaming like now? And if you did, what would be your content on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Faye. It's very timely too, because in fact, I'm just working that out now. Yeah, of what to do, and I think what I enjoy is the talking about art. It's like, okay, so I'm realizing everyone needs their niche. It's just like being an artist. You need a niche, niche,
I think.
So you want to be, but you want to be yourself, because you don't want to be artificial, because sincerity and it's going to come naturally if you do what you're impelled to do, you feel a connection with. So for me, yeah, I think I will do that, and I'm planning on, I got to get a second camera set up, but I might start with I just got StreamYard, and you can do like a screen share of your drawing. I've got a Cintiq here. Share that and do live drawing. May even do some art auctions. Although, as Ethan said on the stream, you can't do that. You can't do that every time, because people maybe get either bored or they get low prices, because they just it doesn't work if you oversaturate the market, that kind of thing. But I think for me, a combination of live drawing, art analysis of past art, and like doing page breakdowns. I had a really good response to a video that I did on my channel, which I've got to do more of it. It's all on my to-do list, but people are saying they like this video I did analyzing a page from David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One, and it was showing the mechanics of how you use shots and perspective and so on to create a strong page design. It's like looking under the hood of the car, right? It's how this stuff works that you wouldn't perceive right away. So I can see doing that, talking about art principles in general, showing off great artists that people might not be as familiar with nowadays, and trying to link them into now, maybe even to comic book artists now, if that's going to be my audience, and show them why it's relevant to study them and be excited about them. And so live drawing, art principles, artists, maybe even do some drawovers if people submit stuff and say, like maybe on a stream, I'd say, if you want to contact me on the next stream, I'll do an analysis. Of course, it's just like what I did on my channel there. You have to have the courage to have somebody go over your work, and that's not always fun. Although, like I said to people on X when I advertised that, I said, I'm not going to be brutal, because I've had that done to me in the past when I was younger. It's like, and we see it online in the online wars, and it's just not fun. I mean, although your enemies can sometimes tell you very true things about your work, but it's like having the Band-Aid ripped off, right? It's like, boom. So I would probably take the approach, if somebody approached me and said, can you give me an analysis and help me? That I think can be very useful, because in fact, that's what my mentor, Alex Toth, did to me. I wrote him. I think I was about 25. I was already experienced in the sense that I was in the game. I was doing published work, but I was very frustrated and trying to figure out next steps. So I wrote him, and I sent him a bunch of my artwork and sketches and things, and said, I said, fair game. Like, I forget what I wrote exactly, but I was like, please just help me. Like, anything you can suggest, I would really appreciate. And he was good for his word. He wrote me back letters. I think I read some of them. I've got lots more of them to read. I mean, he didn't always analyze my artwork because we kind of became friends.
Mm-hmm.
And, he respected me as a young guy that was working and approaching him sincerely and respectfully to him. So we had that kind of even keel. And anyway, when he wrote me back the first time, he was very helpful, and he pointed out some things that I hadn't noticed, and said some very useful, simple tips. And so, yeah, I think if I could do something like that for other people that want it, I would really, I would enjoy that, because it, in fact, in a selfish way, it helps you. If you can say something that you feel is truthful about others' work, it just reinforces it in yourself. And it has, but again, I guess I'd emphasize, to be the most useful, there has to be an opening. So someone has to be saying, like I did with Alex Stowe, somebody has to be saying, please come in, you're mentally ready, please come in and help me. And you're like bracing yourself, because your ego is like, oh, I'm going to have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
If you get frustrated enough,
Mm-hmm.
you're not proceeding, which is the point I was at when I wrote him. I was like, I have to keep getting better.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you seek that out. But that's when you have a conundrum, because particularly nowadays, there's so many voices. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are selling you stuff. Some of them are unintentional disinformation, like they think they're great, but they're not that great. And if you don't, it's like, who do you put your mental weight on and trust with your art development? So you can veer off into sidings unintentionally if you trust maybe bad information. And again, there's a lot of gray areas, because like, what's good information? What's bad information? For me, what I was always seeking was that, like I said, that eternal craft body of what's behind great art of various kinds through the years. And when you start going upstream in your mind to that, there is a real thing to that. It's not just mumbo jumbo. You can see what makes, like, this great Russian painter, this French painter, this Rembrandt from long ago, a really great comic book artist. You can see how they're using common composition principles, or lighting, or management of design shapes in a composition. Or there's all kinds of things like that. And those are examples I'm trying to illuminate for people, that there really is a permanent thing. No one's written it down, because in fact, you can't really permanently write it down. It's in your understanding. So what you can do, though, is try and write, like that's what I do in those art principles. You can try and write down and sort of capture somehow in words clues to show people what those concepts are. And that's what the best of art books that survived. I'm sure Andy has some of those things in his book, and different artists restate these eternal truths in different ways.
Do you think that connects to, I don't know if you're familiar with Carl Jung and the collective unconscious?
A little bit, yeah. I'm certainly aware of him. I don't think I've read his books, but over the years, yes, I've come across, yeah.
Yeah, where it's supposed to be like a lot of stories, like mythology and stuff, connect because we're the same species, and so there's a primitive well of information that's in our DNA.
Yeah.
Do you think
yeah.
that's...
Are you asking me if I think that's valid, or
like?
Yeah, no,
I think that what you're talking about is connected to
no, it's absolutely. Well, one thing that comes to mind, and these are all again in the overworked list of things to do. I've come across this guy on YouTube. Oh, he's not a guy; he's an older fellow in England called Rupert Sheldrake, and I think he's even might have a son that does this. But he has a fascinating thing, alternative theories, and he has this thing, and I don't even know if I haven't watched enough of them to be able to accurately represent it. But the basics seem to be, he has a concept called morphic resonance. And it inevitably leads to, I think, spirituality and the idea that consciousness is not rooted in our physical matter, it's somewhere else. We're more like a receiver. And that, his idea of morphic resonance resonated with me. So it's a whole thing to look into. You were asking me, like, it came into my mind, like the muse, like, are you sort of, what was your question again? Where art comes from, those type of?
Well, you were talking about the internal body of craft,
Yes,
and
right.
that it's
I really think that it exists outside of us. Now, that's a very challenging statement for people sometimes, but at least for myself, through the course of my life, I 100% think that there is another world, and to me, it gets to God in the Bible. It's, call it other stuff if you want. The New Age people have names for it and stuff because they don't want to say God or Jesus or anything like that.
yeah,
I
they
think
all
that's
say
brilliant.
aliens or whatever, because they
Yeah,
can't see something beyond the physical. And I've heard
yeah,
people say that reality is only what you can see, touch, and measure. I'm like, that's a flawed way to look at reality because it exists beyond.
yeah. Well, that's materialism, and people think that
Mhm,
we've been all been kind of hoodwinked into that. But
mhm,
for me, in my life, I've had too many various kinds of experiences that I'm convinced there's something else. Some of them they're serendipity. Some of them are like, that thing where you're thinking of someone and then they phone, which
mhm.
this Rupert Sheldrake, for anybody interested, if you go and watch his videos, it's fascinating because it's coming back to me now. The videos I watched that really intrigued me that he um, made, where like he's even done scientific studies of this, about what he calls the sense of being stared at. And then they did studies where they had volunteers think. Again, I'm only reproducing this crudely, so please go look it up. I think they had volunteers sit and think of someone they were closely connected to, and then sometimes that person would phone. It was kind of like that thing, we've all had it, where you're thinking about something or someone or something you have to do, and then you look up and they just emailed you or they phone you or text you, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of we're trained to because absolutely dismiss that, and I did for most of my life. Oh, it's just coincidence. They give you this word coincidence.
Mhm.
There's some other connection, and when it comes to art and learning art, I know that for me, I think that effort is a kind of prayer. So if you sincerely struggle and strive at something and you are knocking at the gates and you just can't get it, if you're sincere, and I cannot codify this for people or say how long it takes, because sometimes it's very delayed. Maybe if there is something to this, it's metered out for different people, like, oh, you got to wait a lot longer before I'll reward you. But what I do know is that there are magical days and times where
Mhm.
you realize something or you produce something that is really beyond yourself, better. Or like I had experiences, even for example, to make it more concrete, drawing this Mr. X comic when I was a young guy. I was like trying to design these posters, and I'd do drawing after drawing, and they just like didn't look right, and I put them in a big pile. And then I had this one experience I remember. I was so frustrated. I was probably about 22. I was staying up all night in this big old empty studio I have. It was the winter. It was dark. It was like 3 a.m. I was drawing and drawing, and then suddenly I started doing these drawings that were like what they were. You could feel that energy. It's like playing tennis when you hit the sweet spot with,
Mhm.
and you just get the right. It was like it all started flowing. So, and I remember I kept going. Finally, staggered home at like 5 a.m. on the streetcar in Toronto here. But what I remember parallel in my brain realizing about that is, and I remembered it for years and built on it, was that's not me. Like, if it's me, why couldn't I do it 5 hours ago? Why can't I just turn it on, like sit down? And that's when I became evolved or started evolving this theory. Like, you have to at some point, if you are humble enough, in a good sense of humble, that's not me. It's like it's coming through me. And many artists have said this, it's not originating with me. But there is a dividing point where if you don't admit that, my theory is you get blocked. But if you admit that and you consider humble yourself, then what you're studying is it's supplication. It's a form of prayer, and you're asking for new knowledge to come to you from some ethereal. Is it Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, where it comes from other minds? And I think he has a theory that there is a shared body of knowledge, kind of like what you said about Jung and the collective unconscious. But whatever it is, I think that hi Marcus. I think that whatever it is really does come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's not provable. You can't I can't like prove it to somebody, like
Mhm.
prove it to me, bro. But I know in my own life that's always worked. It's like uh and again, the more I worked on it, the more I perceived that there is this one body of knowledge that people have and they operate from. and it creates a kind of it's like a receiver, a radio receiver that's been much more finely elaborated and tuned, knobs and dials, and they can receive much finer imagery in their mind, and then they have the means to put it down on paper or paint or whatever. Or if it's a musician, write a song, because they understand all the stuff about chord structures and balance and artistic principles in music. So yeah, that was a great fun to write those. They were very challenging, Marcus. I was saying to Faye earlier, yeah, I was really super busy freelancing, but that was another one where like I spent nights working on these articles, and because I was like, I got to get this down and they're going to actually publish it. And it has been gratifying that every so often over the years, like, excuse me, over the years through streaming, particularly recently, I've had people say, oh yeah, I read those when I was younger, and then you feel old, but no, but they say that they were helpful. Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Yeah, and they say they're helpful because, I remember I was probably in my, I want to say 40s, 40s. I was really busy, but I was like, I just want to pass this on. And it wasn't for money because it wasn't really paid. I might have gotten $50 for them too. I can't remember. But it was more like, other people have put stuff into books and shared their knowledge. And well, I'm 65, so I don't know how old you are, Marcus. So now they're calling me a senior citizen, but it's really quite hilarious. Mm-hmm. I watched a great video last night of a guy interviewing a 94-year-old woman who had been a bush plane pilot and done all these amazing things in her life. And the coolest thing was that she said, many cool things she said, but she said, I feel young. I have a hard time understanding that I'm old or considered old. And you could actually see it on her face. She didn't look, she looked, wrinkled and old, but she had kind of a spark to her, which was very cool. So anyway, we're talking, that's taking me off the topic. So,
yeah. Well, to really back in, I think it kind of goes with, I saw a little bit of your tweets where you were talking about people's anger being programmed to defend like the information that I guess authority or like powers that be want in control.
Yes. Yeah, I mean again, it's like so many things, they come from your own life. Mm-hmm. So when I write those things, I've said on my tweets, I'm not political anymore. In fact, I detest the division of politics. Yes. And then when I see that the utility of them, I think is fake. I don't think it's leading us where people think it's going to lead us to, maybe sometimes in the short term. Then you see the reactions to people. And when I say it comes from people, reactions from people, when you say those things, it's very telling. And I don't say that harshly. I just say that, like, I used to have those reactions too, not that long ago. And it's like a miracle. I thank God that I popped out of that, probably from this insane lockdown nonsense. It just snapped me right out. It was a process, but it made me see that, wait, we're being lied to in so many ways. But what it is very difficult because your ego takes a huge hit because you have to admit you've been scammed. Anytime you're scammed anywhere in life, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's materially with money or something, somebody tricks you and doesn't pay you or whatever, it's very painful. But if you have enough of that, you start getting a nose for it. And what happened to me with like politics is like I realized it's not real. And the whole anger reaction thing you just referred to, that's part of the whole scheme. And again, I can't prove it, but I just can see you. Once you're out of it, it's like what they say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like the minute you react really angrily and you don't listen, there's something else, some other mechanism going on there. And it happened to me enough times earlier. Like, I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else, but I do see that there's now a division of people. I can see it on X where there's enough other people tweeting those kinds of things. Didn't originate with me, but I just put it out there because like that's part of my daily life. I was like, no, I don't want to actually talk about Donald Trump, but I will say if you get angry because I say he's just another politician, then in my opinion, have a look. Like I can't do anything. It's your life, but it's no fun being angry, and it's no fun being mocking people and just saying they're idiots because they believe in this, like because they voted for Biden or something, or up here in Canada, we have all the same stuff. It's like, well, you're voting for this other guy, and yeah, he may do some good things, some of the, but you can make a really good case that a lot of it is just leading you somewhere that probably we don't want to go. And it's not a proof, but I guess my simple way of explaining it is like, how many years have to go by? Like I said, I'm 65. I remember being 20, and they're promising all this stuff. Eventually in the 80s, Reagan got elected and he said, we're going to make America a shining city on the hill, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And some of it came true. Things were booming for a while, but then they go bust. They boom, bust. And then here we are now. It's 2024. They've got these people talking about this insane stuff with transhumanism and the World Economic Forum, and there's riots and this crazy migration and illegal things happening. And everyone's fighting more than ever. So I'm sitting here just going, when I popped out of it, I'm going, what happened to utopia, guys? All these politicians, they promised it, they're not delivering it. And then I get called black pill. They say, oh, that's really black pill. And that's like, guys, you're saying I'm black pill because I'm telling you you're being scammed? You want to stay scammed? Be scammed. I don't care. That doesn't make me black pill. It makes me happy. I try and explain to people, say, because I don't believe these guys. And when it comes to other stuff, I don't believe there's asteroids going to come and smash the earth every few years. They say in the news, right, Marcus, where's my flying car? I'm still waiting. I was like, these guys are liars. They're professional liars. Everybody should know that. Even if you look at the other team of politicians, they're professional liars. And they have the measure of people that they understand psychology far better than the average person. And part of the programming is not only to get angry, part of the programming is that people have these big egos where they think, well, nobody could ever scam me. I'm impervious. I'm on like the awake crowd. And you start saying that to yourself too much. It's just like in art. If you start saying, I'm really good, because I see people tweeting these things, they go, and to me, I'm not like that harsh, but I look at something, it's kind of okay, it's mediocre. And they're going, oh, I'm so proud of this. This is like my best thing ever. And they're self-validating. It's like, okay, again, it's freedom. I'm not the art police, but if you do that, you're going to block yourself as much as if you're down on yourself too much and you say, oh, I'm no good. I'm terrible. I'm useless. You're both ways. You just miss the razor's edges where you can objectively release yourself from being over-attached to your work. You can analyze it as, you can at 1 minute be as passionate about your art as anything and super into it. And then the next day you can turn a thing in your head, look at it coolly and as cruelly as your worst enemy would, and perceive its flaws. And if you can figure out how to do that, you can improve. And I'm convinced that some version of that is how people improve, although not everybody records it. It's like live streaming. Not everybody has the plan for StreamYard where you can record the stream and play it back. So some people just intuitively somehow go through that kind of pain because it is painful. I guess I went off the topic about talking about the anger reactions, but
it all connects.
Yeah, it all connects. And, a main theme through my life has been, whether it's politics or whether it's drawing, it's realizing how much of it depends on psychology, because psychology is not just what it's been warped into, this wacky, Freud says, so let me analyze you. I'm analyzing you. You're on the couch,
It's
social
engineering.
That's social engineering. But for your own development, if we're talking about being an art student and developing at whatever stage, it's, the first person you have to contend with is yourself. It's not really about getting social validation and getting retweeted 400 times and being on the right stream or whatever. I mean, that can be nice, but really what's going to make you better is going through your own challenges of like, I got to buckle down and learn this. Like I still have that, and I'm still learning, whether it's about streaming or different things. It's like, you got to get your butt in the chair or go for a walk and listen. Now we have YouTube videos explaining, like I'm watching ones about how to make better YouTube videos or whatever. But back for me, when I was starting as a teen, I was in my room reading these drawing books, different books I had a collection of them, and just trying to buckle down and just learn the craft. So what you find is the first obstacle is yourself, right? So if you can't do it and you kind of know, yeah, if I was the guy who could practice like that, I would get better. The problem is you got to get yourself to actually do it. There's a famous story that comes to mind. You know Norman Rockwell, the brilliant Saturday Evening Post cover artist. He, in one of his books, his biography, he talks about being in art school, and another student that was very good, he relates, but lazy, said to him, I think it was like a rich kid or something, I don't know, something like that. He was like, this guy was like, oh yeah, if I practiced a lot, I'd be as good as whatever, the current superstar. This is when they were both unknown. And so, of course, Norman Rockwell was a workaholic, a workhorse, and he went on to become a superstar, and the other guy didn't. So it's a peculiar thing to hear. And he obviously could see it in this other student, but that illustrates the whole idea about it's your own psychology that can stop you. And then you have to work on the craft, but you have to also work on yourself and how to develop. Really? Wow, Marcus. Memoronic? I don't know how to pronounce that, but went to my high school when it was a one-room schoolhouse. Wow. Norman Rockwell, just genius level work. I mean, and when you see his, and when I start streaming, I'll have to do screen sharing of some of his images. I mean, they're all over the internet, but I feel like there's so much stuff out there. Sometimes maybe people don't know what to focus on, and when they do, they're not sure what makes it great. But yeah, he's unbelievable. When he got dismissed sometimes by the fine art snobs as being, oh, well, he's just an illustrator. But the guy was like a genius painter. His best paintings, like some of them were what he got represented as this narrow thing, like the corny Americana, which some of them, I guess, edge into that territory, the crowd-pleasing sort of flag-waving Americana, mom's apple pie. But when you look at his more subtle paintings, and there were lots of them, they're just incredible technique, and every lesson you could ever want, And not only that, they're just, I think I was probably tweeting about this type of stuff, like comic book artists now, they just look at each other and they look at Jim Lee or something, but they're just hundreds of amazing illustrators from the past, not to mention fine art painters.
Oh, Winsor McCay. I know that's still comics, but Winsor McCay, Little Nemo and Slumberland.
Right. Oh yeah. No, he's a great example. Yeah. No, just incredible stuff. Design, color, drawing, perspective. Or
I saw your
sorry?
Little Nemo in Planeland you did.
Oh yeah, well that was a fun assignment. I wasn't looking at the chat here because I forgot to click on the Little Nemo in Planeland. Well, that was a project that I'm trying to remember if they crowdfunded, if that was an early crowdfund, but they did this big giant book. I'll have to get out. I have one copy of it. It's just like immense. And that was really fun.
While you grab it if you want.
No, it's not really at hand. It's down the hall in my room somewhere, I think. I'm not even sure, but I'll do it on one of my streams maybe sometime. But it was a great assignment because, again, like what I said about Chris Pitzer's anthologies, it was carte blanche, as they say in French. So I could do whatever I wanted. And excuse me. So again, I intersected my own interest, which is airplanes. And I thought, what would Little Nemo do with dreaming of airplanes? And I came up with this little mini story about Little Nemo dreaming of being a pilot and being attacked by the clown pilot brigade, like evil clowns in planes. and it's kind of fun.
So how did you get into, well, I know you were into sci-fi. Is that how you got into like the drawing tech? Or was that just something you always loved, was technology? And
Yeah. Probably from being a male, you get attracted to all the machismo stuff, the action, and then I think probably a lot of it had to do with really being triggered and accelerated by 1977. Star Wars came out, and I still remember the impact of that first opening moments of the first movie. I guess it's called A New Hope, right? My buddy Peter and I would go to theater, and when that screen with that Star Destroyer comes by, we were just like, that just slayed, whatever the word is, right? What's the slang nowadays? I don't know. Sick.
It was cool.
It was cool. Yeah. Well, we said cool back then too. So it was just the greatest thing ever. And this is not a record by any means for now, but back then it was for us. We went back to see it 8 times. Hello, Gordox. Yeah, we went to see that movie 8 times in a row within the next few weeks, like lots of people did, and it just killed me. And I think it triggered me onto like that, trying to draw more of that stuff. And I got these design books that they were releasing. There's a fellow called Ron Cobb, who was a political cartoonist. If you look him up online, you'll see he was a political cartoonist. And Winsor McCay, who did Little Nemo in Slumberland, was the same thing. He was a political cartoonist, but he also did a comic strip. And the same thing for this Ron Cobb. He was a left-wing guy, Ron Cobb. I think he's still alive, I'm pretty sure. But he was also, besides being a cartoonist, he was hired to do these films. Like he designed Alien. I don't think he worked on Star Wars. That was mostly a guy called Ralph McQuarrie, who did amazing stuff. And then a guy called Joe Johnston. A bunch of other people worked on Star Wars, but movies like Alien and Blade Runner, Sid Mead is famous for having worked on Blade Runner. So all those movies were coming out, and they really kind of accelerated me into drawing all that stuff, trying to figure out how to make it look good. And I think probably a fair dose of other science fiction books. I was reading paperback books. There's a British artist called Chris Foss, with 2 S's, Chris Foss, who just does amazing work. And I was also a super hardcore fan of his. I used to go to the Bayshore Mall in Ottawa, to the bookstore as a teenager, because I would be looking. He had a distinctive little signature. Right, the Hildebrandt Brothers. Yeah, that's a great one. I had their calendars, the Lord of the Rings calendars. They did the Hildebrandts. Those were massively inspiring. There's so many things coming out. But again, back then it was all like find it in the real world. So I'd go to the shopping center into the W.H. Smith up here in Canada. There's a book chain called W.H. Smith. I'm not sure if it's still going, but British name. And I would scour the shelves for anything cool, or like these paperback book covers. Chris Foss, yeah. Safety checks, right? The checkerboard patterns he used. He did these amazing spaceships, and he's the one who got me onto using airbrush, because somehow, through probably reading, I think it was Cinefex magazine they were selling back then, there must have been an interview or something, because this is what I meant, Faye, about not remembering the exact beginning points. But at some point I figured out this guy's getting these beautiful blended effects for clouds and things, and it's a thing called an airbrush. And it turned out my friend Jeff had one that he used for models. So then I saw what it was, and eventually bugged my dad, who grumbled. But one fine day on a Saturday, he took me downtown to the art store in Ottawa, where we lived then, before I moved to Toronto here. And he bought me. It was like a glorious day. I was probably about 16. He said, "Well, I'll pay for it, but I bet you won't use it in a week. You'll just leave it in the corner of your room." But no, he was good for his word. He bought me, I think it was maybe my birthday, I can't remember, but he bought me a compressor and the airbrush and the different stuff you needed. So I proved him wrong, because I was like using that sucker constantly. Had my mask on in my room, spraying all these things. It's kind of like a mad scientist, because again, there was no internet back then to be distracted by. So I'd come home from school and I'd go in my room, close the door. I have a brother, but I was just in there spraying, and my mother would yell, "Paul, it's time for dinner," and I'd say, "Okay," but I wouldn't go down. An hour later, she'd come back. She'd be kind of annoyed, but she'd be also kind of understanding, the way moms are. And I'd go downstairs and eat my cold dinner. So it was. I guess I'm reminiscing, but those are kind of glory days.
Forgot to ask, do you have any siblings, or were you an only child?
No, I'm a middle child, so I have a younger sister and an older brother. And so I'm for psychology, I'm the middle child. Whatever, they say that your birth order gives you different attributes. I don't know how true that is. It might be.
Gary Martin's a middle child too.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know. You got the goods on people. Yeah. No.
Yeah, it's funny how many comic artists have brothers. Like Aaron LaPresti has a brother, Andy Smith,
Right.
you. And so I
Are
wonder
they
if
all older brothers, Faye?
well, I didn't ask Aaron. I forgot to ask him when I did the interview. But I do know that his brother's into board games
Yeah.
for like what he said. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting how that comes up.
Yeah, my brother is I wouldn't cast us as an artistic family generally, but my brother was and still plays music. He was interested in guitar and now he plays the upright bass guitar, interested in music. I'd come home from school every day back then and he'd be in the living room often practicing annoying the neighbors. But before my dad came home from work, I think it must have been. And so he had this is like the 70s, mind you. So I have this picture of him with long hair and he has the bell-bottom jeans on and he's playing along with like Eddie Van Halen or Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze, Jimi Hendrix. And he's got the wah-wah pedal, that little pedal you modulate, whatever it is. So I have this memory of that in my head. We all have those iconic images. Which Aaron am I younger than? Aaron.
I think he's talking about Aaron Lopresti.
Oh, okay, right. How old's Aaron? I don't know. I never.
He's 60.
I never asked their ages when I made their acquaintance. It's a bit impertinence. Like, how old are you?
32.
No. No. I meant that's okay.
I was born the same year Image started.
No, I meant like when you join something like the thing or
I knew what you meant. But...
Yeah, okay. Oh, I thought I put you on the spot.
I did want to ask you about how you got into the flat Earth theory. I know it's not art related, but
yeah, that's okay. First of all, I'd say I don't call myself that because I don't like the way it's been purposely rebranded as being idiotic, which I wouldn't blame people because I thought that too. And in fact, the first thing you encounter if you go and Google it has been purposely placed there, which is they say that, like I call it level plane theory or alternate cosmology or anything like that, because the idea is that you don't accept the picture that was given to us. Now, people immediately say, well, then if it's not that, what is it? You got to prove to me what it is. It's like, well, I don't know exactly. I'm not an expert, but I can point you to a lot of, which is what happens to people when you try and prove that we're on a spinning globe. If you actually go into it and watch the channels and get past the initial disinformation, you'll come up, and if you're able to go through the cognitive dissonance and just listen calmly, which is what happened to me in the lockdowns. I started listening to all these things I had dismissed as conspiracies. I thought, okay, I'm bored. I'm locked in here. I'm like I feel like the only weirdo in Toronto because I was like the only person I could find in any of the grocery stores that wouldn't wear a mask. So I'm like, that triggered me. And then I was like, okay, I started listening to various videos and eventually migrated to that one, which again seemed like a bridge too far. So like anybody, I was like, what's this flat earth stuff everyone's talking about? And everyone relates the same story, which is you go on Google, you see that they show you flat earthers believe that there's a pie-shaped island. There's like an island, a circular island with a dome on it. And there's like a ragged cliff below it of Earth. And it's floating in space among all these other planets. And it's just massively idiotic. And there's even a Netflix special that they did where they misportrayed it as these kooks believe that. Mm-hmm. So that's the psyop, and it's what most people hit. And it worked on me. I turned around for another year or two. I didn't even bother with it. Like, those guys are idiots. But fortunately, Marcus, I could get into it with you, but I wouldn't. I strictly never argue with people about this stuff. But I'm sure you did almost die. It's not fun, but it doesn't prove that there is such a thing called COVID, though. That's another whole topic that I don't even want to go into. But the whole thing about flat earth, if you go to channels, like, if you want to, but if you dismiss it, then there's nothing anyone can do. That's fine. It's not quite, well, Joe Rogan, there's videos now recirculating on X of Joe Rogan when he was a flat earther before he got his Spotify deal, and they paid him whatever hundreds of millions of dollars. Joe Rogan was an avid moon denier anyway. He wasn't a flat earther, but he He denied the moon landings, and he was really good at it. And he has this friend, Eddie Bravo, who's a flat earther and also a moon landing so-called denier. But anyway, that's what worked for me, is that I think I got into it to kind of work back towards answering your question is, I went from the Twin Towers business.
Mm-hmm.
That's just absurd. The cover story, the so-called official story is just absurd. Then it got me onto looking at moon landing. I think it's the YouTube algorithm. It feeds you this stuff. This is like 2020, 2021. I started thinking, okay, moon landing. I was like, I don't know, but I'm open. And then the more of those I watched, I was like, of course, this is just like massively annoying to have believed this all these years. And it's like the dominoes start toppling. And it does, like, of course, the people who don't believe in this stuff, they'll say, you're progressively going more and more crazy, old fellow or young woman or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that becomes the question. Are you going crazy or becoming more sane? Which way is up? And that's the whole problem, is it because you get into, like, your ideas start becoming fluid and you're not sure of what to, the tent poles that hold everything down, what are up for grabs. But anyway, for me, I could see, and I could do a whole stream about it, like, many people could, having studied very carefully the different claims that people make. I came to the point where I had to say to myself, this moon landing stuff is just complete nonsense. The moon lander alone, when you look at it, it's just a bunch of like cardboard and tape wrapped around things and random riveted things and curtain rods. It's just laughably dumb. But I'm a person who, hopefully that comes across, I'm not interested in being kooky. I want rationality. I always was. That's how I learned to draw. Give me the good stuff, reject the bad. It's a filtering thing. But I want strict evidence. Now, I don't have strict evidence to prove exactly where we live, but there is clear evidence if you compare things and can pattern recognize that where we're told we live, it doesn't work that way. And that's, again, a whole long stream. I was going to recommend a channel. There's one called DITRH. It stands for Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole. It's this guy, David Weiss, who's made a whole career of talking about
DRI.
DITR, Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, DITRH. And the original guy was a guy called Eric Dubay, Dubay, and he's all over YouTube still and Rumble. And there are various theories about these people. Some of them say that they're controlled opposition and they're agents of this and that. Who knows? But Eric Dubay, back in 2015, Fauci, immune system. You see, that gets into health theory, what Marcus is saying and what. See, the thing is that when you get really sick, you get really sick. I can't speak for anyone else's experience. I've been really, really sick. But there are many people, and I subscribe to this, is that all of those things, like when you get really bad sniffles or head cold, all the various things, fever, sweating, everything. You even get stomach upset. Sorry, folks, but diarrhea, all these things. It's your body is purging toxins. It's your natural mechanisms. These have been called diseases, and we all bought it. It's not strictly it's not a contagious disease the way people say. I know that's another thing that triggers people. They get really angry. If you want to look into that, go look up on X, Dr. Tom Cowan, Cowan. Don't get angry at me if you watch this video later. Just go investigate it yourself. And if you don't agree, it's fine. It's no concern of mine. I mean, we each have to make our decisions. I just know that for me, I was never completely happy with explanations, and whether it's in health. Yeah, no, there's bad stuff that can happen.
I think I remember hearing they induce comas on people.
There's all kinds of experiences, and I'm not saying that like those things aren't real. Of course they're real. I've had terrible things happen to me physically and been really sick, but I would say that I am in the camp of as many people and growing. I'm going to say this because I don't want to get you in trouble on YouTube, but the arm use thing, I think that any and all of those, is just evil, toxic poison. And I bitterly regret that, first of all, that was done to me as a kid in the 60s, 70s. I agreed to it later. I feel very bad that I had that done to my children. because I bought into all that stuff. Now, again, this is another topic that we don't have to go into much more. It really triggers people. They get very angry because it's very personal. It's like,
Yeah.
you done that to your kid. And, I know myself, I almost died twice from allergic reactions to being injected, although I didn't connect the dots until later. But now I know for sure that it was. It's never happened to me since, but twice I had that anaphylactic shock reaction. And at the time, like when I recovered, I went back to the doctor. It's like, am I allergic? I'm this thing. And they never say to you, oh, well, like a couple of weeks ago, you had the so-and-so top up, they have these schedules, right? And they don't tell you, they make a fortune, the companies and the doctors themselves make a fortune off all this stuff. And they may even sincerely not understand in some weird, twisted way. They may not have made the connection. And it's very bizarre. But for me, I don't care about any of that. I care about my life experience. I care about seeking truth. And these things have to stop, But I won't say a lot more because, again, it's not necessarily a stream about that. But I'm in this camp of being an older person who, there's a parting of the ways, right? At each point in your life, you have to make decisions. And when I was younger, none of this stuff was really in circulation. It was very strictly hard-walled off into, those are crazy conspiracy kooks way up the highway, off in some desert range. You don't want to go there. So no one did. But with the advent of the internet, it brought it down the highway and they started coming into towns with their signs and stuff, metaphorically speaking. And I eventually got exposed to it. And I would put it like, I'm trying to be a strictly rational person and I hate being lied to.
Yeah. And that's where conspiracies kind of come from, is it's the gap in logic. And so people are looking into things where it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like the KFJ assassination. There's things about it that doesn't make sense. There's things about the moon landing that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't help that when you bring up the things that don't make sense, you get chowed down to and called an idiot, and that makes it more suspicious instead of talking about it rationally and saying like figuring it out. Like
yeah. But
there's always like that. They try to insult people's intelligence right away. I saw that a lot with like atheists talking to Christians too. They try to insult the intelligence right away, even though we all have our different experiences, and so we're going to have a different view of the world. Might as well be a little bit open to figuring out like what's really going on.
There should be a calm, sane middle ground where you can at least discuss things without this extreme anger that's, again, been weaponized into us. And the algorithms do it. Like on X, I'm much more aware than I was a few years ago. And I try and steer clear of it. Like this algorithm is trying to get you enraged. It's showing you stuff to get you scared, enraged, hypnotized, watching either cat videos or fight videos or whatever. There's all kinds of different things streaming along. Good old Elon Musk and his revitalized thing, and it has good uses if you use it purposely for your own purposes. Like I can, or you can, or anybody, advertise our art, right? And we can push it out there. But if you just let it push back on you too much and don't realize what it's doing, it can be really bad. And people get into these extreme states of mind. And see, that's completely the other way. That's bad, Gordox. I know people who, my ex-wife's mother died of that. There's a lot of bad things that can come. I mean, I'll get on to talking about health stuff now. I like 100%. What I'm convinced is, I've said this on other streams, for what good it is, since he brought it up, and then I'll go back to what was I saying about we were talking about being triggered and stuff. No, I mean,
you were talking about algorithms pulling all this stuff to distract us, like cat videos, making us angry.
Yeah. Well, I was going to the Gordox's point. I mean, I don't know if this relates directly to it, but in terms of health, the main thing I realized is, and it's what people have been saying for years, it's like, if you align with the structure of this world, whether it's in beliefs or whether it's in your habits, then there is a plan to it, or there's an order to it, is a better way. People say God has a plan. Well, I don't know if he's an exact plan, but there's an alignment or order. So when we were created, foods were given to us that are natural on this earth. They grow out of the earth, literally, which is a miracle, or on the earth, like cows or whatever, if you eat beef, which is, but it's all part of a system and it's a miracle. But then what people do is they eat toxic poison, which is manufactured food, chemical food in a factory. It's not food. And it makes people inflamed, it makes them unhealthy, and it makes your body struggle to push these toxins out, which they then call disease. Oh, you have this disease, that disease. We got to do this to you to give you this more chemical pills and things. I used to always dismiss that stuff, but now I firmly believe that is the way. And everyone has their own journey because everybody has a different body, a different past, and different conditions to deal with in their life. So there's a very complex thing to it that Dr. Tom Cowan on X and other doctors like him he's a doctor who was a mainstream doctor and he left after many years. So he knows the traditional system, but he completely revolutionized into new ways of looking at all these things. But going back to the other topic about being triggered, yeah, that all that stuff is also a poison and it's very toxic. And I'm a strong believer. I figure I'm here for a reason. I'm just not sure what that is. It's a recurring theme in my writing now. Yes, I mean, this is where when we're talking about so-called level playing world, I said I was on a stream with Patrick Quinlan, which is on his channel, Comicsgate Commandos, or PQ Vox is the YouTube. It was a couple of weeks ago, not long ago. And he was asking me about conspiracies. So I said that the level playing stuff led me back to the Bible because I was never a disbeliever. But being a rationalist, I like to think I'm a rationalist. I was like, how do I make sense of all that? Because people were always saying, oh, the Bible is just metaphorical. But then other times they're saying, oh, you got to take it literally. But when I saw some various so-called flat earthers who are religious, there's a whole range of them because some of them are new agey people, crystal. But they said, go back to Genesis chapter 1. And it says right there, and it's literal. It's astounding. And of course, a lot of people will reject it because if you're a materialist that thinks that we're on a wobbling water ball spinning through, spinning at a tilted angle with the water glued to it and it's hurtling at, 660,000 miles an hour, we're spinning 1,000 miles an hour is what they say. It's all going, and then the whole galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy is supposedly going this way. And then, the solar system is going this way, the Milky Way galaxy is going that way. So it makes it like a spiral. You'll see these animations. And it's completely mad. When you pop out of it, you realize it's completely nutty. And what does it say? You go to the Bible, it says, in the beginning, there's God parted the waters above from the waters below, and he makes sort of a bubble. It's like a terrarium. And he talk about a magician, not black magic, but I don't know, God's magic. Like made this world like a terrarium, and he's just looking down on us.
The greatest visual artist there is.
The greatest artist, and that's where that's where we were talking earlier about channeling stuff. We're just channels. We're channels for different things. If you're an occultist and you are into like black magic and demons and stuff, that's where you see so many people unfortunately drawing all this very dark claws and fangs and like blood dripping, and they're all obsessed with that. It's like, unfortunately, I'm sorry, but you can do what you want. It's your life. We're each given one, but that's not the way up. It's something really dark and black. It's like the black goop in those movies, in these scary movies, some of which reveal truth, like The Matrix or whatever, but they reveal a kind of metaphorical truth. But anyway, the Bible.
For those type of movies, I liked Dark City a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, you can have dark movies, like some dark movies. I guess it depends on the degree. And again, it's one of these personal things. You just, freedom. I believe in freedom. So.
Did you ever see that movie? Because it's aliens that kidnap people and they experiment with their memory. And
yeah.
So,
I've had it recommended to me, but I actually haven't seen it, Faye, because I had it recommended to me because people said it was very similar to this comic book I worked on, Mr. X. Very dark and it's sort of dark noir styling. But I actually never caught up with it, but I will. It's on my list of things to see.
I recommend it. It's
Yeah,
similar to Matrix, but it's more about memory.
okay. Yeah, but really, I think that's the interesting thing I was trying to point out to people is that if you get past the barriers to something like this level playing stuff and study it, and you can admit that there is something to it, intriguing, it does cast a whole new light on a lot of other things. Like for me, I said the Bible and a whole bunch of other things, and it gives you a whole new meaning when you realize, like even sort of spiritually, it's the most gloomy, dispiriting thing to believe that you're stuck in an empty vacuum created for no reason, that they say you're a speck of dust and you're nothing. And it's so demoralizing because you're on an endless journey trapped in this prison of a world that you can't get off, or if you did, you'd die instantly, they say. And then when you realize that none of that exists, it's just not real. It's the greatest relief ever. Of course, people will call you crazy. I guess I'm old enough that I simply don't care. You call me crazy, fine. I know. I've been called names before, but what it is like, did you ever see the Kung Fu movie with Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon?
No, I haven't.
Well, I'm sure people who watch this, some of them have seen, but there's a fight scene in the end of it where Bruce Lee, the hero, he's fighting Dr. Han or whatever. He's this bad guy with this claw hand. They're doing their Kung Fu, but they get trapped in a hall of mirrors, which is a very cool scene. And what it is there are all these different mirrors. So he's Bruce Lee, the hero, he's fighting and he's trying to kick at the villain. But it turns out he's often smashing mirrors because it's just a reflection until eventually he figures out which is the real Mr. Han. Yeah, he figures out which is the real villain. So for me, that's kind of a useful metaphor for this whole topic, because you're going, which is the mirror and which is the real villain? If you go into this stuff, people who are sort of in the normie world, as many people, particularly older people like me, they're like in this world permanently. So they don't want to leave it because it's very comfy. So they're going to go, you're going into crazy land with the mirrors. On the other hand, you can't prove it. But if you feel like this is more truthful and we're being lied to, then you become the guy. And there are lots of men or women saying, and there are people, I see the two camps all over X in various topics. And usually the people actually who walk away, whether it's about flat earth or anything else, they're much calmer. They're not the ones usually, by and large, being hateful. It's always the people who are in the normie world. Like even in the health field, when people, there's people like this Dr. Tom Cowan and lots of others who say that virology has never been proven, the existence of viruses. And that's very controversial for people to hear, right? But usually it's the people who want to stick to the traditional model, they get really angry. But the people who have popped out, well, they get called crazy. So are they calm and are they so calm because they're completely insane? Or is it that they're calm because they've got a piece from seeing finally that, yeah, right. I shouldn't do the Bruce Lee accent, but I remember that Gordox very well. My friends and I used to do that phrase. It's like a finger pointing to the, don't concentrate on the finger, or you miss all the heavenly glory.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee said that line famously in that movie, Enter the Dragon. But I think it's an old saying.
And I have seen some people that, well, they don't get to the yelling, but they'll shut off a conversation before they'll say, oh, that's anti-vax. I don't want to hear any of that.
Exactly.
Or, oh, that's anti-moon landing. I don't want to hear any of that. So there's walls. Some people build up walls, and then I have seen some people that don't want to think at all. And that's scary.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And again, it goes to what I was saying. I mean, we each have to just make our own decision, but that's real freedom, right? Like that's an inherent freedom, the human condition, that no one can do your thinking for you, and you got to walk your steps and live your life. But the thing is that it's how you utilize what comes into your path, because you do have some steering. It's like a navigation between what comes at you every day and what you try and do and choose, and what you try and do and choose and decide, whether it's in your drawing or in your daily life. It's a product of your ideas. And that's why these mind engineers on places like X, like there are camps and teams of people, whether it's billionaire owners and groups of people, or whether it's admittedly lots of militaries have psyops intelligence units with fake accounts, bots and stuff, pushing ideas out. Like, there's a whole war going on. You don't have to be a conspiracy kook to think that. And what you have to understand, when you lose a bit of your arrogance and you realize you can be tricked, right? Exactly, Gord Ox. Let those with the ears to hear hear. Yes. When you get past that barrier of one of the program barriers or blockages, it's like nobody could ever trick me. You realize, oh, I can be tricked easily, and then you go, wait, it's not just an obvious scam that I can be tricked by like a financial thing. It's like my own ideas might be tricking me. And as I said, for me, one of them was the moon thing. When I finally, all I had to do was go to the NASA website, get the high resolution photos of, you just type in Moonlander NASA high res, you can easily find, and you can blow it right up on your screen. Keep blowing up, and you just see it's right there. It's like bumpy cardboard, weirdly taped things, like I said earlier. And you go, this is complete nonsense. This is not a functional flying vehicle that went, landed, and it's just complete madness. But people don't even want to do that, Faye, like you said. I've met people in my life that I try to explain that to, and they go,
there's another thing. Now, sometimes when things are going on in like the world with some of the wars and stuff, I'll check out like Russia Today to get their side of the story, because usually when you look at both sides, there's lies on both sides usually, but you can kind of mince out some truths. But there was an article about the moon landing, and a guy talking about how he had asked about the coordinates to find like where it landed, and they wouldn't allow him to look at the coordinates. And he also mentioned that it kind of confirmed his belief that it was faked. That, and there was a whole thing of the cosmonauts, when they came down, they were bedridden for most of the time that went up into the stations and stuff. Yet the astronauts that supposedly went on the moon were able to walk around. I'm butchering the article, but
well, what you're pointing to is there are all kinds of incoherencies and logical inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Just like maddenly, like once you have them explained to you, Ian McHugh, there's an Ian McCaig and an Ian McHugh, and both of them are really good. I think Ian McHugh is the guy who does those floating tugboat things, right? Those are very cool. And he just did a Kickstarter, I think, Ian McHugh. But I think I follow him on Instagram. Yeah, he has got some really great work. The moon landing thing for me is when I started watching different videos. Like I said, I removed my skepticism. I thought, it's a court and there's a trial on. I'm going to give it a fair hearing. So I just listened fairly. And at some point, after watching a bunch of them, different documentaries, I was like, there's a preponderance of evidence, like they say in the legal system, that this is not what they said it was. So, for example, people were saying, if the moon lander that came down has a massive thrust, even with the moon's lesser gravity, they said it's like a 10,000, pound, ton thrust, I forget. But, it's a massive rocket thing. And it's lowering them and it slows down and stops. Well, if you look at the photos, they're right there in NASA. This is what one of the videos pointed out that really resonated with me. Like it says, look, it's obvious they just dropped it with a crane on a set of sand because there's no blast hole under the central blast rocket that's right underneath it. So there's no crater that it would have had to land into its own crater. Or like if the rocket, it's getting close, the moon is like dusty, and it would have blasted out a cavity, and then they'd either have to land on that cavity or just drift over sideways somehow. I don't know. And then people say, look at the photos of the legs, where the legs are touching. There's no moon dust all over them. It's just pristine and clean. So even simple things like that, you've got to raise questions, because they didn't think of that. Because they weren't, when they did this in 1969, they weren't thinking in years later, people would be having this thing, the internet, where everybody can look at this stuff. They did it for broadcast TV, and they had a much less visually experienced audience back then. And they slapped it together. Obviously, they slapped it together. And, the more you look into these things, you have to come to some point where you go, there is something to these things. But again, if you want to stay in the you have to become more like those people going, nee, and they're just making like a noise, block it out, close their eyes, put the sleep mask on, make a noise. And it doesn't mean you have to accept everything that every video on YouTube or X says. I don't. Some of them are dumb, this like or exaggerated. Some of them are to make a lot of money off feeding people stupid things. Like there's a whole bunch that show you products like salmon or whatever, and then they have a microscope always, and they zoom in on the opening of the microscope with their camera, and then it fades suddenly, and then you see the like a magnified view of something, and there's like all sorts of vermin or things crawling around, and they go, then it goes, it's TikToks. People are making TikToks. It goes, don't eat that, and it goes that TikTok noise at the end, and then you're like, oh, I better never eat that again. But you don't know if that's just somebody's done that with editing and it's just completely fake. And it probably is because they're making a lot of money off making these things go viral. So that's the modern problem with all this stuff, is that you've got this completely crazy landscape of, people who are telling you really true, sincere things, people who are confused, sincerely confused. And then there's other people who are intentionally weaponizing and monetizing information to make money, or to some intelligence unit or a Chinese bot farm with all those iPhones, and they're like making fake accounts. Space junk moving. Oh, that's the Ian McHugh, right? Floating boat, sandcrawler. Yeah, I wish I could support more things too. I wish I was on a yacht with a Mega Millions and I'd just be ordering all these packages. I'd be in Amazon delivery land, just all these Kickstarters, and there's all kinds of products and things that people are crowdfunding that are cool too, on films and all sorts of stuff. So I guess we roamed a lot of different topics here, Faye.
Yeah, I do want to bring it back to art real quick because
sure.
Have you ever heard of Jake Parker?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, because I was looking at his artwork and your artwork, and you guys definitely have the same inspirations. Yeah. Very similar vibe with like the helmets, like on the wind elves and stuff.
Yeah, I like the more whimsical stuff, and I don't know him other than that I was for a time back around the back those earlier times I was mentioning, 2008 maybe, I can't remember, but there's a series of anthologies that were put together by a fellow called Kazu Kibuishi. Mm-hmm. And he went on to do these Amulet books, which are bestsellers, a series of graphic novels, I guess for kids or all ages. And so back then he had this forum, and I forget how I got connected to it, but one of my stories was published in Flight 5, a story I showed in this book. I republished it in this book, but it was this one with this flying helmet guy.
Oh, nice.
It's like another take on those wind elves, but I made it. I sort of took the same idea and made it a little more serious. So it's.
Let me.
Yeah, it's okay.
I know how to do this now.
Yeah. Well, this is like a spread from it. It's about this air cadet who has a flying helmet, and he goes on an adventure, and he finds this floating island that's abandoned. It's like a dead battleship, and he finds these rare flowers. But he gets attacked by this machine here that you see on the right. It's from something called the Machine Tribe, and he has all these adventures. It's like an 8 or 10 page story. I forget, 12 pages. And I don't know if that's focusing, but is that out of focus?
It looks really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. And so that was the story I did for Flight. And then I republished it myself in this book later when there's like a year or two they ask you not to republish it, but that has long since gone by. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, Jake Parker was part of that collective. There were lots of people that were doing stories for this anthology, which is a good thing to do, get practice. It gave me an opportunity to just put out indie type things that I can't go to DC Comics. They're not going to publish that. So even if I wasn't canceled, which I was semi-canceled, I think later, but even before that, they wouldn't have particularly published that kind of material. So anyway, Jake Parker himself too went on to, and he's really popular. He's been doing a lot of different projects and graphic novels and things. So I look up his stuff occasionally. Yeah. And I think he has a YouTube channel you must have seen, School of Storytelling.
Yes, and they're rebooting it. They're doing new classes and stuff like that. So they have educational stuff for, like he's doing a Comic Pro one. and like he's done a few comics like Skyheart and
Right. I think I saw that one.
did Robots in the Ships book.
Yeah, and he did a comic, a graphic novel called Missile Mouse.
Missile Mouse, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's fun. Like it's all kind of, I don't know, maybe influenced by people like Miyazaki, Mobius. Those are all things I dearly love Miyazaki's work. I started with Mobius, but they in fact admired each other. And there was even a joint show they did at some point.
Which reminds me, that was one of my other questions.
Sure.
Your little intro for CG Kings, where it talks about Miyazaki stealing something from you. Is that true, or is that just something someone made up because it rhymes?
Well, that's fun because I finally figured that out. I said it on one of the Kings streams, but I should put that in circulation every time Ethan plays that, because it is a bit mystifying. And I myself was going like you're asking me. I was going, like, what does that mean? But then I finally realized one day, just listening to it, I was like, oh, of course. What it is, so I was the background designer, the key background designer for Robot Dreams, a movie that came out last year. And it ended up in close competition, miraculously. It was like a ragtag indie operation. It's not a big funded Sony Pictures or, Walt Disney or DreamWorks or even Studio Ghibli is now a massive, juggernaut of the animation world. But this was like an indie pop-up studio that was done in Madrid. And I think it was probably only a few $1 million film. I'm not really sure the budget, but it was very low. But it was like the Rocky story, it's like the ragtag contender that came from behind and won all these awards to our great delight and surprise. And then it was in Oscar contention against The Boy and the Heron, which was Miyazaki. But Miyazaki, The Boy and the Heron, won the Oscar. So that's how Miyazaki robbed me, because if not for that, I think probably we had a good shot of winning. But because I think it really is a good movie. And charming and different, but there's no way they were going to let a Spanish-French co-production, like they being in this case Hollywood and the voters of the whatever the guild or whoever decides the Oscars, there's no way they're going to let a foreign, small indie Spanish-French European co-production come in and snatch the Oscar statue of animation, right? There's no way. They're going to give it to Spider-Verse. But if they do, they're going to give it to Studio Ghibli. Like Hayao Miyazaki is so revered that they can go, oh, well, we lost to him, but we're not going to give it to this like little guy studio over there. So anyway, that's why I think that whoever made that video is understanding that the mechanics of that Miyazaki robbed you. My vehicle work looks like a combination of McHugh, Mobius, and Miyazaki. Yeah, it's all those influences. I mean, I just do my own thing now. Like I was doing all this stuff way back, before even Miyazaki came up. Not that I have to compare myself, but you know what I mean? Like he's in turn inspired me seeing his work, but I think we all sort of drink from the same well. But sure, like he's super inspiring. I like, so there's a lot of good people I've followed on Instagram in various fields. Like that is a great thing about today, is that you can have almost too many influences, like you can even psych yourself out. Even being very experienced like me, you can just look at so many, because it collates and collects crowds in.
Yeah.
So many great people at once. Like I even found a whole stream of people that I really admire, because they go in ecosystems, right? So there's a whole ecosystem on Instagram of printmakers. We're doing wood carvings and lino cuts sometimes with multiple layers and impressions. Just some astoundingly beautiful work. I don't have the names memorized, but I just keep following, And then it's like you're up late, and then the stupid algorithm's showing you more of it. You like that? Stay up another 2 hours following all these people. So you're like click, and then it's like you try and go back to get the other ones. It's like netting fish, So that's kind of like, I guess, what is it, Faye, modern problems? Because as I said, not to sound old, but when I was just starting out, there was the reverse thing. It's like I had my stacks of comics and books in my room. And that was it. So you had to just kind of, it's like gazing into the fires, fire gazing, or it's like you're gazing into the fire of these things going, how does Chris Voss do it? Like, what makes him so great? And then you go and Alex Toth, Jack Kirby, why are these guys so good and I suck so bad? And you're trying to figure it out. But that's where I got to eventually, though, figuring out there is a up and a down to it. And, maybe it was a bit of a simpler time because you look at enough art books that are made by some of the illustration masters. Like I looked at the books too by Andrew Loomis, and you can find them online, PDFs. I can send you links to some of them I'm sure you can find PDFs, but if you start with Andrew Loomis, those are just amazing. Those are rock solid, and lots of comic artists swear by them. And who else was I going to say? Andrew Loomis, sorry, it popped out of my head. But particularly Andrew Loomis, creative illustration, Successful Drawing was the name of another of Andrew Loomis' books. But when I came across those kind of books, I was like, oh, there's a real structure to knowledge. And therefore, if you have the basic aptitude and you have the wherewithal to study and practice it, and I see people doing this on X, if you follow that pathway, you can really, you can unlock it. It's kind of like a flowering, and it's like an accelerate. There's a tipping point, all those kind of sayings, right? There's an acceleration that can happen. James Gurney is great. Yeah, you're onto all the good stuff. There you go. James Gurney is brilliant. Dinotopia, amazing painter. And he's got really that craft knowledge himself of, he just released a book. I haven't ordered it because again, it's like you'd spend a fortune, but I'd like to. What's it called? Imaginative Realism? What is it? Maybe Gord Ox knows, but James Gurney did a book, a technique book. That's really good.
Was it Painting Fantasy Realism? I know Aaron Lopresti showed some of his works in the books on his live stream last Sunday, I think.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Because he does that segment, Who's This Guy? And he'll highlight a illustrator.
I'm going to do some of that too. The more the better, because
it was not last weekend, it was the weekend before that.
Yeah. Because one of the many realizations you get, other than if you figure out how to be inspired by things that may at first glance to your vision, it's like your perception changes because you may at first say, oh, that's not my stuff. And just, it's like, again, like what we were talking about with ideas where you laugh at some idea like flat earth. It's kind of like that. Like when I was a teen, my parents had back again before the internet, there's a series of books called the Time Life books. And it was like a book series that they would mail order, right? So they were always doing these 1-800 commercials, and there was a whole thing back then, the Columbia CD Club, where you could order like records. They would mail them to you every month. Mm-hmm. And my parents didn't do that, but they did do a few of these limited ones, like Time Life books. They had all these things on nature. They also had a series of art books. And I remember looking at painters like Edgar Degas and Rembrandt. And to be fair to my youthful self, the reproductions in those older books were not that good when I look at them now. Like if you have a good monitor and you go on high resolution sites that have good reproductions, it's amazing the detail you can see now on a screen. But back then it was kind of a little muddy printing, but still very impressive. But I just dismissed it because it was like, that's like Cézanne or Paul Gauguin or who's the guy with the flowers, Monet. It's like, this guy's painting water lilies. It's just like a bit lame. And I'm a teen and I like robots and science fiction. But
monsters.
Yeah, monsters, and they're really lurid and catchy stuff. But as I got older, and especially now, it's just an appreciation for beauty and for technique. And then you realize as you've done it, the longer you do it, when you realize the difficulty of capturing some of these things. Who's the Spanish painter? Sorolla. There's this guy, Spanish painter, Sorolla, Sorolla, who painted a lot of boats and oceans. And if I was streaming, I'd try and pull some of these things up. But you don't have to, but it's okay. People will look these things up. But just when you see the mastery of catching these glimmering, fleeting effects of water and light, he painted a lot of things with ocean and people like wading into water, fishing, and lots of different subjects. But again, it's like you make a full circle as you get older and you go back and you realize these guys are painting with incredible mastery. Another one that's often cited by realist painters is John Singer Sargent.
Mhm.
And Patrick J. Jones, yeah. I met him once, actually. Patrick Jones, right. I looked him up. He signed his initials PJJ. He was doing book covers in Britain at the same time as Chris Foss. I think he's still going. And I have a dim memory, it's like the youthful brain. I don't know why I didn't all hit record on my StreamYard.
Yeah.
I was on a trip to England, and I was trying to look up by whatever means I could. I did have the oomph to go and look these people up. So yeah, I looked him up. I remember having a beer with him, I think in a pub, and talking to him. He's a science fiction painter who did some very cool stylized paintings, fantasy. I think he illustrated maybe some Michael Moorcock images. I'm not sure. Elric, I'm not sure. But he certainly did a lot of science fiction paperback book covers. I don't know why back then I didn't think of looking up my hero, absolute hero, Chris Foss, but it might have been because he lives on Guernsey. He might have even done back then the Guernsey Islands. Where are they? I forget. They're not directly in Britain. So, yeah, and Patrick J. Jones, he does technique. Yeah, he teaches techniques too. But there are so many great people, even in all these fields. Like I was talking about painters, but and it's great if Aaron is going over some of them, but there's just so many, like even looking up some of the people I've mentioned, there's just endless lessons. I guess the thing, if people were going to listen to me kind of go on about it, I'd say the same advice I got from Alex Toth, which is he strongly, when he wrote me back, and it wasn't chiding, but it was just like advice, good general, eternal, solid advice. He said, diversify, learn about everything, learn about all the different painters, artists. If you're going to be a comic book artist in particular, his advice was to study all the different fields that go into a comic. So you're being a movie director, an editor, you're a costume designer, you're a background designer, you're a lighting director, like in a movie, because you have to, and you could go on, right? So there's all these different bodies of knowledge. If you want to do comics at the craft level, like all these older people did, they were working on understanding all these different things. So I feel like maybe comics have evolved into something a little bit different and more peculiar and individual because of the rise of the internet. And I guess, again, it's a case where I'd arrive at trying to tread carefully. I'd say everybody can do their own thing, and there is a case for like quirky personal things. But if you're a person who's trying to like improve and get to that old, whatever they call it, old school, like really good craft solidity, it will never hurt you to follow that kind of advice and study a wide range of people, because what you inevitably hit on, particularly when you cross compare different fields, is there are eternal principles and ideas behind it. Like you can even see principles in music that apply to art and vice versa. Things about patterning, like for example, the idea of negative space and contrast and relief. So like in art, you find if you densely populate everything and you don't give the eye some relief, it's just overwhelming. Yeah, Jean-Léon Gérôme. There's amazing Russian painters like Repin, and all sorts of other ones. I was saying principles like, relief and contrast. So you can see that in music, right? Like you have a pause or less notes or less whatever tempo. I'm not a musician, but it fascinates me. There's exact parallels. So that's another thing to me that points to the idea that there's something behind all this, and there's like laws of nature and harmony and beauty, maybe. But if you aim for putting those in your art, you start to kind of understand what they are more. And if you can somehow embody some of those in yourself, you can put them back in your work. And it could be as simple as in the back over there, I've got some twigs and branches and things. But as kooky as it is, if you study, well, I don't know if you're going to see it. Here, I'll get some. Why not? I'll be kooky. 1 second.
Found out how to do full screen.
All right. I don't mind. I put myself walking around my room on the internet. There's nothing particular I'm going to point to. I'm just saying that, when I look at some of these things, the textures. And I just keep them because it's fascinating. It reminds me to, I keep them around to remind me, like, you look at the older artists, they put that kind of life into this is hard to explain because you can't prove it. I look at these patterns of bark, right, and the irregularities. A lot of artists now, particularly inkers and people in comics, they do everything in a kind of dead way. It's like it's too harsh and rigid. They outline everything. Yeah. And when they do natural flowing things, they don't use flow. Maybe we can go back on the shared screen because I'm looking at myself. There's a whole thing you can learn there that you see in those older painters. Like these are great ones, like Gordox's. Klimt for sure, and his fellow school artist Egon Schiele, Sargent, Goya, Albert Bierstadt. Yeah, there's just endless people when you start digging into it. I mean, Wikipedia is an amazing resource because they have lists of these things. You can just spend endless time, but I mean, it's almost overwhelming. But no, what I was talking about was if you want a feeling of life in your work, it doesn't hurt you to study organic things and see, well, you know, when you make a sidewalk, like I think of things like this when they were fixing the sidewalks down my street. So they make it perfectly mechanically, even if the little kids nearby don't walk in it or put things. It's all nice and neat. But then you get the elements, you get wind and rain, and you get
plants cracking.
Card nudges it, and you get some cracks and weathering. And it's the same with buildings. You know, then you get life, and that's not even something that's flowing because it doesn't really flow. But it's weathering that gives it interest. But I guess what I'm going to more when I show things like bark is if you look at water, the way it flows, or the way leaves on the ground are distributed or whatever, they're never going to be spaced like completely equally like a grid, right? They're going to be spaced unevenly because that's how nature does it. But there's a kind of balance, a dynamic balance at the same time. And if you look at a lot of these older artists, they understood this. I don't know if they sit around at BC Comics in the back room and Joe Kubert and Nick Cardy talked about, you know, over their coffee, like, let's talk about dynamic balance, Nick. I don't know, but I bet they kind of had some version of that conversation because if you look at those older guys, their art, and those are just two random ones I chose, there's a kind of organic flow to their inking and to their drawing. Whereas now what I see often, particularly from people who come up through the internet and they don't draw things with their own eyes, they have a stiffer, kind of more mechanical approach, which comes from not going to nature. So another thing I often say, just in tweets or online, is go to nature, study nature. Like whether it's for figures, you've got to do life drawing if you're an artist that's doing like superheroes. I mean, you don't have to, but you can see right away the people who are using 3D assets who've never done a life drawing in their life, not to trigger that whole thing. But really, that's where it goes to for me. It's not the political fighting and all the stupid slap fights that, you know, like snarling. It's really more what it points to is that this older craft of, you know, this really eternal, beautiful craft of drawing, like you'd have in old academies, where they do cast drawings, life drawings. And they did that on purpose, not because they were like stuffy. It's because it developed a certain sensibility in people. You know, unfortunately, there's very good things about the modern access that we have to posing tools and all that. Dean Cornwell is amazing. Yeah. N.C. Wyeth. Right, there you go. I said it before you posted it. Howard Pyle. You got to put in Howard Pyle there.
Eric Papp.
Howard Pyle, yeah.
Eric Papp. His name's Eric Papp. He was an illustrator from that time period and was NCY's first teacher.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. There you go. You learn something new every day. Yeah, and I mean, Howard Pyle had a whole school and he taught N.C. Wyeth. And then they in turn taught was Harvey Dunn and Franklin Schoonover. I'm forgetting some of them. There's so many of these people that are just staggering when you look up their work. A great tip for people who might not have heard of it is on Facebook, the group Today's Inspiration, run by Leaf Peng. So if you find a group on Facebook called Today's 'S, Today's Inspiration, they have endless albums that are hosted there of, I think it's mostly illustrators and comic artists. You just you'll go blind looking through all of them, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, Pyle, Maxfield Parrish, Arthur Rackham,
Mhm.
absolutely. Uh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
tricky to remember the contemporary of Rackham. That's my favorite. It's probably
Another thing I've noticed, like, because I went to art school, but I went for comics specifically, was that, and I see it as a problem that's happened a lot with people's storytelling, is vagueness, not
yeah,
wanting to show things because they're like holding it to be revealed later
yes.
because they don't really have a strong story. If you have a strong story, it doesn't matter if you reveal it, it'll build up to a good story. But like hiding characters' faces and all that type of stuff.
Oh yeah. No, you're completely right. There's a whole thing to that. That's again what I'm getting kind of referring to when I talk about craft knowledge. Like there's a whole body even within. There's like one big wider circle or sphere of like art, right?
Mm-hmm.
But within that, there's comic books, so it's like a subset, but it uses many of the same principles. So within that, there's like if you're talking about comic storytelling, there's so many things like that um, like what I see when I look at it is I see people who are doing things for reasons like what you said, like say they can't draw that well, they'll do things to avoid drawing difficult things, or they haven't figured out how to simplify it. I mean, we all fall into those things, but sometimes it's just simply not understanding basic mechanics, like the whole 180-degree rule in storyboarding about left-right stuff, and when that applies to comic book pages, about how you have to set things up so people can follow what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that often means things like an establishing shot. So show some kind of shot where it's like in a movie, there's an establishing shot, although in modern movies, there's not so many because they do a lot of wobbly cameras and they don't always actually know themselves how to set this stuff up. It depends what you're talking about. But if you look at older classic movies, like I love the movies from David Lean, like Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago. David Lean, Lean, was an amazing director. The Bridge on the River Kwai.
I've seen that one. That was a good movie.
Stunning movies, and a complete knowledge of storytelling. It doesn't port over one-to-one to comic books, but there's a ton of stuff in there that can be used. But really what it is about what you touched on is not confusing the audience. And for example, a lot of modern comics, they're not really true sequential art. It sounds harsh, but they're more veering into illustration and they've lost their cartooning roots.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not all of them. For example, in indie comics, I see something similar but different, which is to say, a lot of them draw more crudely, at least in my eyes. But they're trying to be cartoonier, and they like comics like Calvin and Hobbes, and I don't know what their influences are, but they're not trying to do like super rendered DC comics or the inheritance from those kinds of looks, like DC and Marvel and all that. They're trying to do either personal quirky styles or very cartoony styles, tell personal stories, and that's all fine. But they, in a different way, are often lacking because they probably don't like or study the older comics that they could learn things from. They're kind of trying to reinvent the same language that exactly Will Eisner's books is something I've mentioned and will keep mentioning. Exactly. Will Eisner's books about storytelling and create, what's it called? Storytelling and sequential art, I think it's called. But you can find them on Amazon by Will Eisner, who did The Spirit, of course, for people who wouldn't know that. But yes, exactly. He was one of the first, those books, I should have even thought to mention them. Along with other ones like, yeah, perfect. I've got that one too.
I
The
also got Contract with God.
sorry, you cut out there. I couldn't hear.
Oh, I said I also got his book, The Contract with God.
Right. I haven't got that one, but the books he did on storytelling are very useful craft, and they point you towards right. They point you towards that useful way of thinking about comics as a sequential medium rather than illustrative. Because a lot of the artists, I think what happened is in the 90s with Jim Lee and all those inkers coming up, I don't think they did it intentionally, but I think they kind of took a left turn at Albuquerque and they went off more into that super like muscly chromium hatching thing. And they sort of forgot about storytelling. Like one of my heroes that Gordox hasn't mentioned is Roy Crane, who did Buzz Sawyer, B-U-Z Sawyer. No, I haven't read Eisner Miller from Dark Horse Press. Like I said, too many things to buy. Is that a book of interviews? Sounds like we got to interview you, Gordox, whoever you are. I have to have you on my stream, and you can teach me. Frank Miller is another great one. Like he's a good example, actually, of somebody. I wouldn't call him guilty of over illustrating. He's somebody who clearly, and David Mazzucchelli is another one, who clearly understood all the lessons. Oh, there you go, Marcus. That must have been great. Well, I was class at SVA.
That's really cool.
I mean, people like David Mazzucchelli, Frank Miller, they clearly did beautiful and very impactful illustrations, but oh, hi, Rich. Oh, we're all puny. Come on. I'll write that down. I don't know if we're friends already on X, but we should be. Rich, where? Because I think this is all the stuff. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a bit highfalutin, but I think all these older influences, they should be pumped out there. And it's in the internet culture, it might be perceived as being mean. Hopefully people can see I'm just a big puffball and I'm not mean, but I do have opinions, and I feel like the comics art is so beautiful, the older art. It doesn't have to be that everyone draws the exact same stuff. Just don't leave all that stuff behind on the, abandoned, rotting in the field like a beautiful old car. It's like, do you know what I mean? It's like there's so much beautiful older craft knowledge that I see people trying to reinvent, where you want to go, 100 years ago in like Winsor McKay, he's not maybe the best example because he did actually more static, like far away camera. He didn't do a lot of cutting. There's a whole more discussions about it, but anyway, there's a lot of knowledge that shouldn't get abandoned, because what I see has happened is there's different pockets. It's kind of crystallized, right? So there's the indie, almost naive field, and then there's the post-image comics like superhero, indie comics. That's maybe a bit too general a caricature, but you know what I mean? It's like they've got distinct kind of ethos or stylized things, and most people don't seem to stray out of that. And I think these other influences are always healthy. Will came up from Florida every other week. Andre LeBlanc, I don't know his work, Andre LeBlanc. But that group, Today's Inspiration, that I said on Facebook, man, and even acts like people like Kevin Wolf posting tons of, Kevin Wolf Art is his account. He's been posting tons of stuff that I keep retweeting and looking at, because he's posting like older stuff. Like Andre LeBlanc. I don't know that name. There's so
pulling it up.
But this Kevin Wolf was posting, and also Butch Geiss, if I pronounce his name right, the comic artist Butch, Guice, Geiss, I think, I don't know. He has an account on Instagram, and he's been posting very great examples of older artists. One of them was Lou Fine, that I only knew as in a limited way, but this guy Lou Fine was just amazing. Who's this Andre LeBlanc? No. Teen Titans, I don't know. That's your channel name, Gordox? I'll follow you back when I'm off this. Yeah, thanks. I think all that stuff, when you get people that remember this stuff or have studied it and know it, it's useful to talk about and put back in circulation, because, as I said, it's like a tonic against some of the other stuff that's circulating around. And what you have to do, I think, is, which I would try and do when I stream about it and maybe show examples, is show why it's good. Maybe do overlays over some of this great art and explain, try and create an inroad so people can see, like, why is this really good? And secondarily, how is it relevant to what I'm doing? Because that's the connection you have to make. Just like for me, when I looked at Monet's paintings of water lilies as a teen, and I was up in my room doing science fiction paintings, it wasn't really, it's like, how can this help me? I didn't see why it was great. Everyone said it was great. But now I go back, and it's like, I look at even things like Gauguin, Paul Gauguin, that I really hated. But he's just amazing, some of the paintings these guys did. Or even Vincent van Gogh, famously. Everyone raves about Vincent, but I didn't get it, because to me back then it looked kind of crude. But now I look at it and I say, I can see past that. I see why people said this is just amazing work. And you can extract something from all of it. Andre, I'm a mod at the David Finch fan server. Cool. Very nice. Well, I'll look you up. Andre worked for Eisner, as did Lou Fine. Okay, right. I heard that because I read Steranko's book and I remember about the history of comics, and I remember him mentioning that. Oh, wait, sorry, I didn't read it. Okay, he ghosted for the Phantom and Flash Gordon for years, and he drew the Illustrated Bible. Okay, yeah, there's so many of these people. Another one is that Kevin Wolf's been posting about on X is Bob Oxner, that worked for DC Comics, and I had only seen a little tiny bit of his work, like Angel and the Ape, that he did for DC. But the great thing about the internet is you catch up with all this stuff later, right? Like, and then you realize these guys were just master cartoonists, but they also illustrated. But I mean, the whole business with North American comics, it kind of took more of a turn, I guess. Kind of post Neil Adams bringing in, he was like a bridging point maybe, and other people, but it went more illustrative and it kind of kept going that way. Although Neil Adams, I wouldn't roast too much because he had some great stuff he did. People, we comics nerds debate all this stuff, right? Graham, Graham's favorites. Yeah, Bob Oxner is amazing.
And then you also have the influence of like manga and anime.
That is a really good point, and that's coming in there too. And I think the thing for students I would probably emphasize over and over is try and dig it behind and get the real principles. Because if you there's nothing wrong with copying your favorites, which I did, but what you want to really learn, that's why I called my Instagram Art Principles, is you want to learn the principles. Yeah, Marcus, he did the Ben Casey comic strip, right, in the newspaper, which again, this oh, is that right? Neil really made Frank Miller what he was. Yeah, apparently did he work for the Continuity Studios, Frank Miller? I don't exactly know Frank Miller's story, so these would be good to talk about at some point, because it's always interesting to learn, and it gets you inspired. It shows you the connections between things, and it kind of revitalizes you. Yeah, sorry.
It kind of shows the cycles too, because we're in a new wave of Japanese influence on art, which happened back in I think it was the 1800s when Japan opened up again, and they were getting the block prints, and that's when you started seeing artists use the black line around their illustrations, like Muka and Van Gogh did a few Japanese prints pieces too.
It's very interesting to watch those echoes, and I guess they went probably more slowly back then. The ripples, they influence Japan, the West, and then the Japan influences the West back. And like you're saying, the same thing with manga, which was maybe influenced earlier by North American comics. I don't know, but now the cycles are much faster because of instant digital media. So I think the thing for artists coming up is it's again two sides of the same coin. Like, you've got this digital access, but it can be overwhelming. And you've got this abundance of technique information, but it can be overwhelming. So the real trick is to find your own pathway to kind of ingesting it in pieces. I was doing a little bit of mentoring privately, and I was saying to one person that you've got to find your own pathway. And that goes back to what I said about being a self-analyst, because it's like a prescription at the doctor, and it's not going to be the same thing for everybody. Mm-hmm. So, I remember saying to this person, I think I realized about myself, people start from different places. So, for example, I began much more fussy and realistic in my really younger drawings. And it took me a long time to understand cartooning and loosening up and simple stuff. Cool. These are cool posts.
Did you need that one?
Cool comments. Frank moved from NY to NY from Vermont and looked Neil up. to New York from, okay. And he shows him his drawings and Neil drew all over them with red marker. That's great. Miller moved into Hell's Kitchen and drew until Neil made a call. Okay, right. And got him his first job. I think I read that somewhere. Yeah. These are great stories. These are, I have my own brutal stories. Well, not quite like that, but one story, I digress from my other point. I'll probably forget, but my story like that is I had done a book cover, which was like a lucky thing I got when I was 17. But then later, when I was really early starting on, and this is probably what prompted me later to write a postcard to Alex Toth and ask for advice, is sorry, you threw me off, but it's okay. No, that was interesting. I made a train trip to New York City when I was 22, and I was really feeling, plucky and adventurous. It's like, I'm going to get more paperback work. And I went to see different people, some of whom were very encouraging, like Archie Goodwin at Epic magazine back then. I think it was Epic, early days of Epic, or maybe he was doing his job at Marvel. But I had one meeting with him, and he was encouraging. Like, I didn't get work out of it, but he was a good guy, like everybody says, Archie Goodwin. I went to see a man named John Workman at Heavy Metal, who I'm pretty sure it's foggy, but I think it was kind of neutral. But I went to see Ace Books and some of the different paperback houses that were publishing people like, Frank Frazetta and Jeffrey Jones and all these great cover artists. And I don't know if it was Ace Books, but it was one of the biggies. I go in to the waiting room. I had made an appointment. I had done it properly, back then by telephone. Hello, I was on there. Like, could I, show my portfolio? It's like, okay, be there at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. And I was in this New York City for like 3 or 4 days. So I got there, sitting nervously in the waiting room. The art director comes out. This is very instructive. Like, talk about a bracing tonic, like just, because he comes out, he was a really busy guy. He's wearing a tie. He's all sweaty. He's probably like under deadline pressure. He's like, what's your name? Hi. And he's like, I said, Paul. He's like, show me your book. So I take the big black portfolio and he put it in front of him. He opens it. He goes like this, literally like this. He goes, and he gets to the end. He goes, thanks for coming. I was like, did you get the message? Like, I guess I'm not good enough. So I had this long train trip back, sulking, kind of like, because I was getting published, but it was like, no, you're not good enough to be in the big leagues. And it makes you think, and so now I guess we have internet experiences and some of this kind of stuff, which can be healthy. I think I'm kind of ad-libbing on all these topics. It gets distracted. That's why on some of my X tweets, I'm criticizing all this like constant fighting, and it's like a sidebar. It's not going to make you better. It's just like a personal. Mm-hmm. It's Ken Kelly. It's almost like a distraction because it gets everybody so emotionally wound up that if you're a young artist and you get involved in that and you get in one of these tribes, it's one thing to like support crowdfunding and stuff. And it's just like free advice. People can do whatever the hell they want, but it's just like so distracting that the mental and emotional energy, and it's like, don't spend 3 hours on a live stream arguing with people. I mean, watch whatever you want, but like, what if you practiced, if you read these art books? In a year or two, if you do that every night, you're going to be amazing. If you practice, you figure out how to do it, like you get the Frank Miller treatment. Sorry.
Now, you do a lot of some mentoring. Have you noticed the trend of people asking permission to do things? Because I've been on watched a few live streams where they're doing like an Ask Me Anything artist and stuff. There's always the questions about, can I do this instead of I'm doing this? Is it smarter to do like one thing, or it gets very permissive in the questions?
Are you saying that people are being too laid back, like they're being too scared and asking for permission?
Permission to do art, or to do like 2 different paths in art and stuff like that. It's really weird, but it's something I've noticed.
I'm not sure I 100% understand, but if you're talking about, what it connects to me with talking about is, you have to have a weird mixture of ego and arrogance and humility, because what I see though is with the modern world, and I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, but really with this online stuff, people are made into idols, like art idols. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's good. I realized recently, I think you should admire people that you think have mastery or talent or things to teach or whatever it is. But really what it should point to is not just an admiration. Like I wrote it this way on one of my Instagrams, the sincerest form of imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? And then I changed it to imitation of the way people think is the sincerest form of imitation. It's like, see what I mean? Like, that's the approach I took with, for example, Alex Toth, and I still take. It's like, you want to keep running up the hill. You don't say that guy's a god or woman. I'll never be that good. And yeah, it's a bit arrogant to say, I'm going to be as good as Neil Adams. But you should try. Don't just, because what happens is when people revere these people as gods, they go, oh, they're just so great. It becomes more like idol worship. It's not, you get blinded and you stop studying, like, how do they think? Because the thing I've said is, I wanted to unlock how Alex Toth how he thinks, how he thought, right? What was his mechanism of approaching work? All that stuff. Any of these older people that had these real skills. The problem, of course, became that some of them couldn't really explain it. Like some of them were just intuitive, and they're just like, oh, I don't know, I just sit down and do it. But other people like him, he could actually write you postcards and letters, and say, when you ask him a question, I did a whole interview with him that was published in Comic Book Artist magazine. And I asked him a whole series of questions by postcard. And then he wrote me back answers. I wrote him batches of 5 questions. And then he wrote me answers. And then I kind of edited them down into text. And it was eventually published. And because I was trying to like reverse engineer. When you stop thinking, okay, this guy's just a god with a mystical way of working, and he just produces this stuff like magic. You go, okay, it's a human being. He gets up every day, he eats, he smokes his cigarettes, this guy, whatever. He has his mannerisms, but he sits down and does the work. And it's like, what is the mechanism? He must have learned it. So when you remove that kind of mysticism from it, it puts the ball back in your court, which is, I think, part of why this mysticism has emerged. And I don't know if this connects to what you were talking about asking permission, but it becomes a thing that's like, well, I can never be that great because it's just a mystical magic thing that I wasn't born with greatness. So I don't have to do the work. So the thing is, when you realize it's a craft and that you can get there by steps and studying, just like anything else, like if you want to become a master boxer, you got to put in the road work and the ring work and the gloves and the different, so it's kind of like that. So then it puts the ball back in your court and the responsibility. You have to go and do the work. And then if you don't succeed, there's no one to blame because the door was always open. It's kind of challenging to think that way. And it's an older way of thinking. That is some of the dangers I see in the modern way of approaching stuff, is that, again, in all this frenzy of stuff, whether it's the fighting or frenzy of information, people lose sight of these goals. Like you don't want to be the bro or broette that spends 5 or 10 years fighting online. You want to be an artist, but you're not better after 10 years. Like, don't be that person, if you want my opinion, because you'll regret it. Like, it'll vanish, and that's all ephemeral. I mean, it has its place in time, but it's wispy. It has no permanence in you. All these stupid fights. Never judge yourself by another artist. You don't know how far into their art journey exactly compared to where you are. Judge yourself by where you have been and where you've. Yeah, I liken it to what I call climbing Art Mountain. So Art Mountain is that body of knowledge, and everyone's got a different route up the slopes. And people who've been ahead and maybe older and know more, if you like their work and you think that they know what they're talking about, they can be like a Sherpa, like in Nepal, Sherpa. They can guide you up the good routes. They can occasionally take a pack or two off your back if you're really exhausted, but they'll give it back to you after a while. You got to walk all the way, the way up yourself. But and the good thing is that there are Sherpas. There's roadways up the mountain, but it's a pretty intimidating mountain, and you can easily roll back down. So
don't be Sisyphus. The guy rolling.
Yeah. So there's kind of different sides to that advice, right? It can be taken as discouraging by people, or it's encouraging. because it's both, but anyone online who I see art teachers maybe who could be accused of making it look a little too easy, and it goes into the mysticism because they go, it's like what I said in another stream about that book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, that John Buscema illustrated and Stan Lee put together. It's good, but it's like a watered down version of things like the Andrew Loomis method, because it'll show you a circle for a head, then you do a crosshair, and then there's a finished drawing of a head that looks great. It's like, and then if you don't understand that there's way more knowledge that you need to draw heads really well, and you just think you can learn to draw heads really well by just copying that, you're going to be in trouble, because it's not going to work that well. You're going to be frustrated, and you've bought into the mysticism of them saying, and I see other people, I don't mean to trash that book because it's a good book, but I'm saying you just have to take it with a grain of salt and understand what you have additionally to add to it. But there's people online I see doing art courses, and they say, just ABC, do like this, how to learn how to draw comics. And you look at their work and they're not that good. They're not as good as the older people, but they're selling these courses that make it look easy. And then of course the people probably end up blaming themselves if they don't get that good from doing the course or doing that thing. It's because there's a lot more to it. And that's not meant to discourage you. It's meant to say the road up that mountain is steep, but if you diligently follow it the real way, and I do see people nowadays doing that, you will get better in the way that you want, but you have to do it authentically and not try and take sort of
shortcuts,
unintentional shortcuts. It's not even always people trying to purposely take shortcuts. Like, I'm putting this stuff out there for anyone who's going to hear this. It's like they want to listen. It's like to remind you that there is more to it, and that if you don't get the results by those simple formula methods, then don't blame yourself. It's like actually there's more to it. But
you have to make the commitment and do the work.
Sorry?
You have to make the commitment and do the work.
Yeah, there's a very good book I was showing one of the people I was mentoring about perspective. It's called How to Draw Creative Perspective by Ernest, Ernest K. Watson. It was the Watson behind Watson Guptill Publications, the art book publisher. I'm pretty sure it's the same Watson.
It's the same one that Andy Smith used for his book.
Oh, yeah, there you go. So this guy, Ernest K. Watson, was an illustrator too, and he made this really good book. It was very helpful to me. And it's how to use creative perspective. It's probably the best single book that you can get, although there are many books on perspective, because he integrated illustrations from famous illustrators from the era, mostly like the 50s, people like Robert Fawcett. And he has breakdowns in the book, not only about perspective principles, but how these people applied them creatively in their designs and adjusted perspective for the purpose of design. So it's the intersection between, like, you can't just draw lines to a point and think that your image is going to look good. It might, but you usually have a lot of other considerations at play. And that's where you get into the rough waters sometimes with, like, creating a composition, like I say, a comic book cover, and you've got figures in space and you've got buildings going back, and you've got a lot of decisions to make about how to arrange them. Well, that book is a very good one for showing how earlier illustrators thought about illustration and integrated it into their picture making process. So Mark Crilly, is it Crilly or Grilly? I think it's Crilly, isn't it? Mark Crilly has some, or is it Grilly? I don't know. I think about Mark Crilly. Great short.
You also looked into
Crilly, yeah.
Architectural perspective. So I guess there's a few things there that's supposed to happen.
I'm going to look that up. This is, because I remember seeing his channel years ago, Rich, Mark Crilly. I'm pretty sure he has a big YouTube channel, I think, doing art instruction. If only I was so lucky. Those are the early adopters. They got in and just got these men. There's a guy called Proco, the channel Proco, that's pretty good. It's got a massive following. So
awesome. There's the Draftsman podcast too, but that's more them talking about craftsmanship and illustration.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't come across that one because it's always a triangulation between, any working day. I'm sure everybody knows, like, you're like, do I watch 3 hours of YouTube videos, 2 hours of Instagram, or do I go and do my work or go shopping or go for a walk or whatever? It's like, so there are too many things to watch. Modern problems, I guess.
That is that one I mentioned is Stan Prokof.
Yeah.
And
Stan Prokopenko.
Yeah, and Marshall Vandross.
Right.
And I guess he has perspective videos that he's been working on, of course.
Yeah, I think I saw 1 or 2 ads for those on my feed. You get all the ads and paid ads. He's a graduate of the Jeff Watts Atelier, right? Yeah, well, they're basically harkening back to the old good stuff, right? Like the real mainline. And I mean, again, that's an awareness I'd probably just keep repeating over and over, that, like when I said about not reinventing the wheel, and that's what I think I see some people doing. It's like, that you kind of get your own thing that you're comfortable with. I guess it really depends what you want in the end. It's like, if you want to be in a sort of a Grandma Moses, Grandma Moses, the naive folk art painter. She was I don't know if she was turn of the century, but she was like a famous folk art painter who was very naive, but still charming in her own way. But it wasn't like studied art or realist art. And there are people like that. I think you could even say there's some in the comic space. And if you want to be that, be that. I guess it really comes down to what you want, but you can't really put your legs on 2 stools at the same time, right? You got to figure out which thing you want. So I think if you're an artist that wants to really develop technique and, I don't know, slickness, control, it's really worth studying the older stuff. And it's because it's connected, like Jeff Watts tell you, all these people connect back in time to the older traditions from the art academies. Mark's, he's a graduate. Mark's are shorts and he draws showing you the technique. Yeah. I've done a little bit of that on my channel, and like Faye was asking me here, I think that would hopefully make good content for live streaming. The trick, I think, is to keep it interesting, and hopefully it would be for people. I mean, draw streams can be there's different opinions. I'm interested in your opinion, Faye, like, and anyone commenting, like, is that enough? I was thinking if I stream is to maybe mix it up and do shorter drawing things, and then do reviews and mix it up in the same stream, because maybe 2 or 3 hours of just one drawing, I don't know, will people watch?
Yeah, I think so.
They will?
I do think that having either someone to read the chat for you,
right,
or having other people to draw with, like graybeards, is probably going to be a better formula than just by yourself.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Yeah,
You gotta go get some friends.
Yeah. I got some friends. I don't know. I got some friends that I could even think of trying to get on stream, but I don't know if they're up to speed with all this stuff. Similarly to, I wasn't either about a year ago. I mean, I watched a lot of different things, but I wasn't really sort of up on this whole streaming culture. There's a certain thing to it, right? And so I don't know if any of them would come on and actually draw live, because that can be intimidating for people too, right? So I don't know. I'm going to work it out. I think if I did it myself, just by myself at first, I might do reviews and do a shorter drawing, like half an hour. And I would probably do it the way I did on my, I have a playlist comically called Drawsplaining, which is really the same thing. This is like, I talk about it and try and draw and talk about the choices to kind of externalize them. Like externalizing the voice you have in your head. And I did that on a bunch of drawings that I made, some of my robot drawings on my YouTube, my Rocket Fiction YouTube channel. People can go find that. There's a playlist called Drawsplaining. So I did, usually they're about an hour drawings. And I try and explain what I'm thinking as I'm doing it, which again, I'm repeating myself. You normally wouldn't do that. But you're drawing, okay, I've got my figure sketched in, and how do I put the robot here? How big should he be? Why am I choosing his shape? Because it's an attempt to externalize that stuff and show people what are hopefully good decisions if they like the end result, or if it bombed, it would be like, okay, that's how I got into I made some bad decision at some point. Because that's really what you need to be a working commercial artist of any kind, right? You You need predictable control, whether you're an animator or a background artist or a comic book artist, and you're delivering on professional deadlines. You have to have some kind of control and predictability, because otherwise you're not going to be doing it for long.
Yeah.
Concepts, layouts, drawing, inking. I do 3-hour streams and some watch, but few watch all the way through. Yeah, you can see in the statistics on the channel.
Yeah.
I do commission paintings in multiple parts. Some are active and not so much. Right.
I also started doing draw live streaming too.
Yeah, it's
it helps if you have topics to talk about too.
Yeah, and if you get, I guess it's a kind of a cycling up, right? Like if you get enough people watching, then you have more of a chat, and you can ask them to ask questions, or they're going to start fighting with each other, and you can throw some of them out. And no, it's like take them by the scruff of the neck, throw them out,
or just watch the battle unfold.
Watch the battle. But I'm sure that often, like we're having here, I'm enjoying the comments from people, and that can put you on a new direction. And I thought it would be interesting. Has anybody done this? To interact with the chat and draw? I'm sure someone's thought of it, like draw stuff that people are making suggestions. Like you start drawing a robot and someone says, add this in the background. Or
I think Anthony Wheeler is doing that.
Anthony Wheeler.
Yeah, he sometimes appears on the podcast 3 Point Perspective, and that one has Jake Parker, Lee White, and Will Terry, but sometimes they have him on as one of the guests, and I think that was one of the things he does on his Instagram, because they have like the reels where you can draw live there too.
Yeah. I think it's really probably just to find one's own niche, that works. And I think I'd be comfortable doing that. Yeah, why not? But you don't want to bore people, but you want it to be useful. That would be my approach. And I know I've seen even on other topics, people do live streams. I saw Shane Davis a few days ago do a good live stream about, working and promoting, how to promote yourself and the reasons for it. And I've seen different people. Ethan's done something like that too. Different people. It's like that's really useful, solid information. It happens to be on that topic, say promotion, but I think that you can just, again, like I said at the start of our talk, you can only go on what you are made of, or, I'm always about like trying to find useful information for myself. And I kind of feel for people who are younger in this crazy world of all this stuff going on. Hopefully I could be some use and pass things on. People do seem to be interested. I end up feeling old because I had one person at an animation company I was doing work for. And I walked in when I was starting, and I said, I worked on Batman Beyond doing the background designs. She went, she was about your age. She said, I grew up with that. I was like a little kid watching. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I also watched the Batman animated series and the Batman Beyond.
You feel a little ancient, but still going.
Mm-hmm.
Wheeler is a cartoonist. He Twitches, right? I am not on Twitch, but he does like children's books, illustrations, and he had a card game that takes 3 prompts and you're supposed to draw them. Oh, that's fun. That's really fun. Yeah. And I guess it's, people can't in the chat display images. I wonder what would happen if they could. It would be pandemonium. Do you know what I mean? Like say you had because you have to bring people on a stream to have a joint draw stream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you had a thing where people were like, you were interacting and people were making suggestions and they drew things. But again, it's not visual chat. So there must be a reason. I guess they find that too hard to control.
Mm-hmm. There is like Pete Sametti has where he does open line nights. So he has like a number that people can jump in on the stream and either promote their stuff. So maybe you could have someone from the chat come on and you draw together.
Yeah. Or I was thinking of offering, critiques like the draw everything, but do it live. And again, it's not to savage someone, but I mean, if it built up, it would be, we're all promoting each other. And there is something, if you can take that bull between what's the saying? Bull by the horns, bit between your teeth. Mm-hmm. All these old sayings. If you can really
grab the bull by the horns.
Grab the bull by the horns. You can really learn that way more quickly. And it can be a little painful, I suppose, but it can also be fun. Like I said, I did that with this Alex Toth. He wrote me back stuff, and I listened to him because I was ready for it. I was like, just tell me. And he had suggestions, like he said, son, when you're doing life drawings, get a big, thick, chunky pencil. He said, you're drawing right, because I was drawing people on the streetcar with a thin marker like this, like a,
Yeah.
and I was doing all these scribbly lines and things, trying to capture the pose. And he said, son, just find the one line, one main line, and get a big, thick, chunky pencil or marker and just get that one line and learn to see that way. And that was like, alone was great advice. And I started doing that, and it really helped, because it was like, okay, simplify. Don't worry about scribbling in all little details. Just look for the big forms and flow and shapes, like you would as an animation artist.
Yeah.
Twitch is connected to Discord, so they post on Discord, and then Wheeler shows it off. Oh, okay. He's a positive influence for kids for sure. I pop in there. Yeah, kind of like with video games, I so far have stopped myself from extending even more into these things, because I find myself so busy even now with Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. There's X is so busy since I got on there. It's like, where do you actually have time to draw and create?
Yeah.
Do it.
I suppose I should be reading those.
That's okay. I'm practicing.
Yeah.
So did you feel like you had any more questions, or should we taper off here? Because it's been
a while. It's getting late. I'm sure it's late where you're at. You're 3 hours ahead.
It's 10 o'clock. It's all right.
And we pretty much hit all my questions. It was really nice talking to you. And you're always welcome back if you want to come on and stream.
For sure.
I do my draw stream on Fridays.
All right. Well, I'll consider that. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you liked it, Spambot. And I hope you had, I can't see how many watchers you had, but I hope you had some people in on the repeat.
Yeah.
And I think just before I jumped on, I tweeted out your link, but I'll retweet it and tell people to come and watch me yak with you about this stuff. But
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the invite, Faye.
And thank you for coming on. And that was one thing, is I have been trying to make a mix of guests, but it depends on like who actually responds back. Like, I guess this week I had a bunch of Canadians, because I had Todd McFarlane and Dave Sim.
Oh, did you have them on? Did you have them on your stream?
No, I reached out to them, but I hadn't heard back.
Oh,
yeah.
They're like in the the celestial stratosphere of, I'm sure Todd's running his toy company, so he's like, well, I paid you back a watch. Oh, you mean Faye? You paid Faye back a watch?
Thank you.
Yeah, good. No, it's good to have viewers, and I'm sure you'll get repeat people. Yeah. So.
Oh, and then someone Spambot waved.
He waved. Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everybody. So I'm gonna.
Good night. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye for now.